You don't do good trying to not laugh, bro. It doesn't work for you. All right. Welcome, everyone, to the sermon time. Prepare for it. Get control of yourself, man.
Sorry, that was my fault.
It's this problem.
I had a good joke.
This again. Go ahead. Do your stand.
Want me to do it? Oh. I'm not a stand-up guy. Oh,
I don't think so either.
no, I'll freeze up.
Not so much. Let's see. Lord, I thank you for this opportunity to bring forth this word, God. I don't know, it's really big, God. I think it's something that goes right to the heart of what we need in this season. So I thank you for it, God. I pray that this time and place will be perfectly set up to receive this message, and that we would have a heart to hear what you want to say to your church today. I pray that in Jesus' name. Amen. So the topic today, pretty sure everyone's going to be interested in it. It's probably not sure. And the topic is contentment. I think most people would say that they're not content, but that they would love to be. And it's an interesting thing. I've been involved in counseling for a long time. Even when it's not an official counseling session, I still have a lot of conversations with people that are on that basis. You know, you're in ministry and you sit down with people want to have a conversation with you. And it's interesting how often people will bring their problems. We all have problems, right? People will bring their problems and they'll lay their problems sort of at your feet. They're like, well, this is going on, this is going on. It's like self-diagnosis, right? We look at our life, I'm not happy with this. You know, I feel empty, I feel unfulfilled, there's something wrong. There's little alarm bells going off in the back of my head all the time. And so they'll look out at their life and, hey, here's a problem. Because there's always a problem. Life is like a game of whack-a-mole with problems. Like you whack one mole and out pops another, just hitting them. And there's always another one. And our tendency is to think like, oh, if I'm discontented, it must be because I have problems. And you grab the nearest, biggest, most urgent problem in your life and you try to fix it. And maybe you do, maybe you don't. But either way, you're still discontent. Even if you fix the problem, you whack the mole, that's gone. You've won the game for 30 seconds before another problem pops up in your life. What you'll discover is, I'm still unfulfilled. I'm still discontented. I don't understand. The problem that was causing it's gone. Why isn't it gone? And so what happens is you go to somebody for counseling. At some point you go, dude, I have all these problems. But really, after you talk to them for a while, you realize, no, what you're really coming for is like, hey man, I came with all these problems, and I fixed a lot of them, and it didn't fix anything. And now I'm getting to this place of like, why am I even trying to fix my problems anymore? It's one of those, what good is money if it doesn't buy you what you want situation? What good is taking care of the problems in my life if I'm still not happy with my life? I have less problems, but there's still this hollow brokenness at the core of it. And when I met Jesus, when I first met God, I knew that He was the answer, and I still believe that He is, but somehow I'm not getting the key in the lock. I have all the ingredients, it feels like, but I keep cooking the cake wrong. It keeps coming out the wrong way. And I thought that I knew what I was doing, and I'm trying to fix it, but it's not really getting me there. At the end of the day, I'm stuck. And this is very, very common. Now, when I was a young man, I was probably 22 maybe, I was working on a sermon, and I don't remember what the sermon was about. I don't think it was even on this topic. It was like I was working on a message, I was in prayer, working on things, and then God threw me like this pearl of wisdom out of way out of right field. Like it wasn't anything we were talking about, but it was so arresting, that I filed it away, and it's always been in my mind. It comes up in my mind a lot. Because it was one of those things you're like, dang, that's true. But then you're like, I have no idea what to do with it. But it's got to be important, but I don't know what to do with it. And this is what God hit me with, paraphrasing, essentially, is I felt like, and I don't know what I was working on. I don't think it was like on Moses, or it wasn't anything about it. But all of a sudden, it was like God whispered in my heart, for a man to be content, he has to know what he was created for, and he has to know that he's doing it. And it was just like, bing. You go, man, that's, your truth alarm goes off, right? You're like, that's true. But there's not an immediate application. Like, what am I going to do? How do I plug into that? I don't know. So you file it away in the back of your brain, and it's sitting there. And then you start to realize that it means a lot more than you might first think. Because what do people think of when they think of contentment? What is contentment to most people? Some people, they mean happiness. Most people mean, I don't really have any problems. I don't want anything. I have everything I want. These are the kinds of ideas that we have with contentment. And there is that idea at the core of contentment that it's some sort of satiation, right? I'm satisfied in a way. But I'm going to tell you right now, being content doesn't mean you don't have problems in your life. You'll always have problems in your life. As long as you are alive, walking this earth, things are going to happen. And you're going to have to deal with them. And you're going to have goals. And you're going to have things that you're shooting for. And sometimes you miss and sometimes you hit. But even when you hit it, there's going to be something else to shoot for behind that. That's not what contentment means. Contentment doesn't mean I've entered into paradise early and I'm just sitting around waiting for the rapture or something. That's not what contentment means. What contentment means is I know what I was created for, and I know that I'm accomplishing it. And there is an existential hunger, an existential fear, an existential crisis that rings in everyone's soul until they can answer those two questions with, I know it. Until you know what you were created to do, until you know that you're doing it, there's this little alarm going off inside saying, what are you doing? What are you doing with your life? And you go, I don't know, I'm kind of trying to figure it out as I go. I think I'm maybe somewhere in the right place, maybe. Other people say it's important to do this. I think being married is important. I think having kids is important. I think all these things are important. I know Jesus is important, but somehow that's the question mark that will haunt you. Is this what God created you for? Or are you missing it? And that's all that contentment is you know that part is right. I know what God created me to do. I know that I'm doing it. I know I'm fulfilling my purpose in my life. And there might be a million problems. There might be big problems. You have a kid with terminal cancer and know what your calling is and that you're killing it, that you're getting it done. Your wife could die. Your business could fail. You could get your house foreclosed on. You'd be bankrupt living in a box under a bridge. You'd be living in a country and all of a sudden they're killing Christians just for being Christians and still be content. Because contentment doesn't mean you don't have problems. Contentment means that the greatest problem that you could have in your life, which is not embracing your purpose, that problem has been solved. And it's like when the core there is right, it puts all the other things in perspective. It balances everything. It's incredibly precious, contentment. Because everything else becomes a tempest in a teapot. It becomes smaller and it takes up correct proportion. It doesn't mean that pain isn't going to hurt, or that suffering isn't going to be suffering, or that you aren't going to mourn when things happen, that you're not going to struggle and get frustrated. It's not that all those things go away. It's that they come into focus to the true level of importance they should have in your life. And what happens when you don't have contentment, when you don't know what you were created for, you don't know whether you're doing it or not, when you have a question mark in the center of you about that, everything is blown out of proportion. Every problem becomes terminal. Everything is just a sign, like it's salt in the wound that makes it scream out all the louder. What are you doing? You don't even know what you're here for, and now you're screwing this up too? Now you got this going on? And it just salts the wound. It just makes that part of you scream out all the louder. That's what discontentment does. And a lot of times in a counseling type of situation, people are coming to me with their problems, and their problems aren't really their real problem. It's just what they're grabbing onto to try to express their discontentedness. What they're really saying is, I don't know who I am, I don't know why I'm here, but I'm pretty sure I'm screwing it all up. And time is running out. I can feel it. I can feel the judgment seat coming, and I know I'm not ready. I know that I will be looking down at my life. I will be judging it unworthy on the last day. Let alone God, let alone the rest of creation. I, the person who would want to wink it past and say, well, it's good, let's judge it on a curve. I detest it. I look down, even though I have pleasures in my life, I have beautiful things in my life, I'm looking down and saying, I don't buy it. I don't buy that this is why I'm here. I don't see that. And see, so what people do is they grab onto the biggest problem they might have. And you'll see a young man come in and say, I'm addicted to pornography. It's a real problem. But you know what he gets? You help him with the problem, you get him into a place of victory, and after a while he goes back to it. And you go, why did you go back to it? Was there something fall through? Something like, no. I knew how to get the victory. I knew it was there. I just realized it didn't buy me what I wanted it to. I thought I would get free of that, and that was what was causing me to feel so empty inside. And believe me, it doesn't make you feel good. And there's some joy in victory that can kind of blind you to any other problems in your life. I've succeeded in God with something. I've gotten to a new level. And it blinds you to the fact that, well, I still don't know who I am, though. I still don't know what I'm doing with my life. I'm still kind of guessing all that stuff. And after the victory fades, you look at it and say, well, okay, you don't see it in proper context. So you're either lionizing that victory or you despise it. You despise it. You throw it away. Well, who cares? What does it matter if I have victory over that if I'm still wasting my life? You might not have the words to really put that into focus, but that's what goes on. And you'll see people who are doing very well. They're starting to really conquer their problems in their life, and then they just drop it. And the reason why is because there's a central problem. There's a central issue, and if that doesn't get set up right, then everything else is taken out of proportion. You know, a woman could come in for counseling. I've had people come up, you know, my wife is really struggling, and they'll talk about her problems, you know. She thinks she's a horrible mother. She thinks she screwed up her kids. Blah, 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 all these things. And those things might be true. She might be a terrible mother. Your kids might be getting screwed up. Like, I'm not saying that those problems aren't necessarily real, that they don't need to be fixed. But you can look at it and you go, you're making a giant assumption here. You're assuming that's what's really wrong, what's sending up the red flags in your heart, in her heart, what's making you think the ship's about to sink. You think it's the problems you can grab onto. Because that's the lightning rod. That's where you see the symptoms pop up. But maybe the real issue is your wife isn't content. She doesn't know why she was created. She doesn't know why she's here. And she certainly doesn't believe that she's accomplishing any of it. And so she gets up in the morning and she starts stepping out to be a good mother, but then she goes, well, what's the point of this? This is my life. What is this? See, most of the times we think the problems create the discontentment. But if there's any connection, and a lot of times there's absolutely no connection between your problems and your discontentment. You're just making the association. But when there is an association, it's almost always the other way. Your discontentment's creating the problem. It's robbing you of any desire to do a good job, and so you create the problem. Maybe you are a lousy mother because you go, well, this isn't it, or this isn't all of it. And what's the point of doing it if I'm not... What is this? I'm just a babysitter, and you despise your life, and then you do a crappy job, and then you hate yourself for that. And then you're hurting other people, and then you get focused on fixing that whack-a-mole problem, and all it does is distract you from the real problem. So that even when you start to fix it, and things start to turn around, it's a hollow victory. That's how it feels to you, because you're still as discontent as you always were. And so you never stick with it. You always give up, and you get stuck in a pattern there. And what you got to do in counseling sometimes is go up and say, I know you think you know what's wrong with you. But we're going to take all your problems, the real ones, the fake ones, everything, and we're going to sweep them right off the table and say, screw all that. We're not talking about any of that. We're going to talk about this. If you look down into your heart right now, do you know why you're on the planet? And do you know you're doing it? And people will say things, well, I kind of think maybe I know. And it's like, no. There is no such thing as a period after contentment. There is a exclamation point where there's a question mark. And if it's a question mark, you're not content. Contentment is like fire in the prairie. You're not going to be like, is that a fire? If you're asking the question, it's not. It's a heat shimmer or something. A fire, smoke billowing up to the sky. You're going to, if there's a grass fire, you know it's a grass fire. And if you're saying, well, maybe it's kind of sparkly, well, is that fire? It's not. If there's any question mark about it, it's not. If you're wondering right now if you're content, you're not. If you were content, it'd come singing out of you right now. It would be undeniable. It's like being in love. You go, maybe I'm in love. No, you're not. If you're in love, you'd know it. There wouldn't be any argument about it inside of you. Most of the time, we got to go right down to that issue and try to figure it out. Are we going to be content or not? It comes down to answering those questions. They're deep questions, don't get me wrong. But we're not focused on them. We're working on our other problems. It's a distraction in reality. It doesn't matter if you succeed or not. Those things aren't going to get fixed. You're not going to apply yourself. You're not going to show up in prayer. God's going to knock on your door. You're going to roll over and go back to sleep, hit the snooze bar, say, what is the point? Discontentment can rob you of almost anything. What does the scripture say? Godliness, that's reverence, with contentment is great gain. You know why? Because reverence without contentment isn't. If you're aware of God's presence, but you don't know whether you're doing your job, it's not a good thing, really. It can drive you to shame. It can drive you into guilt. It can drive you into despair. You're like, I know God's there, but I don't know whether that's really a good thing for me. Because I don't know what He wants, and I don't know if I'm doing it. But godliness, reverence is what the word godliness means. Reverence with contentment. I know what God wants. I know I'm doing it, and I'm abiding in His presence right now. That's huge. You're on a spiritual mountaintop if you got that. And most of us are issued with even growing in reverence and growing in God's presence. People go, I struggle to get into God's presence. I struggle to stay in God's presence. And like, well, how do you think you look in God's presence? Do you have peace deep down inside yourself? That you are who you're supposed to be and that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing? Because if you think you're a screw-up, maybe you don't want to go to the principal's office. If you think you're getting an award there, then maybe you sing and dance into the presence of God. But if you think you're a loser and you're going to get suspended, maybe there's a negative form of fear and trembling. Maybe you're doing everything you can to postpone going there. Give me another minute to see if I can get my stuff together. Knock out another problem. Maybe I can get a gold star. But you know what? None of that problem solving is going to fix that question. It needs an answer, not an excuse. Now, if we look at creation, I think it gives us a hint. Like if we take this basic definition, and I'm going to throw in a male version of this and a female version of this, because I do think, in my experience, it's very different. There's a little tweak in the focus. So if we're talking about, and this is how God actually said it to me in my prayer time, He said, if a man is going to be content, then he has to know what he is called to do, what he was created to do, and that he's doing it. Now, inherent in that idea, foundational to that idea, is that that man needs to know who he is created to be. He needs to know who he is before he can really understand what he's supposed to do, and that he's doing it. The foundation of doing is being, right? That's necessary. If you're going to fight fires, you need to be a fireman. If you're going to catch fish, then you're a fisherman. It's like those things are together as one. You can't really separate them out. You'll be out there, I'm going to go out and fight fires. Well, at some point you're going to realize I am a fireman. I'm fighting the fires. That's what's happening. The identity is connected on both ends. It's like two sides of the same coin. We can say, what was I put on this earth to do? That's one side. But on the other side of that, what was I created to be? You can't have one without the other, right? But there's a focus, right? You're going to be on one side of that coin more than the other. It's where your brain is going to go. And for a man, it's doing. That's what we're focused on. You talk to a man about his life, he's going to be like, man, I know I'm supposed to be doing something. That's where his heart is going to be. But if you go and you talk to women, and I'm not saying that there isn't some crazy person out there that this isn't true of, or, in my experience, this is true. And in my experience, even people who say, well, that's not true, that's not right, I'm a doer. I'm a woman, but I'm a doer, But you dig into it and go, okay, we're defining our terms a little bit differently or something. Or you get some healing and they go, actually, this is crazy how much this is true. I didn't think it was true of me at all. But now I've gotten a little way in the healing process and I realize it is true. So this is what I'm saying. You might be a guy and go, like, I don't care about doing. Well, maybe that's what you tell yourself. Because you're afraid to do something, or you have a trauma there and you're trying to avoid that, but there's a part of you that's broken and aching because you reject that part. And I think the same thing would be true with a woman. But here's the difference I see. With a man, it's I know what I was made to do, and I know that I'm doing it. And in the background, there is this understanding of who you are, who you were created to be. But it's a foundational thing to the doing. That's where the focus is. If you go and you look at a woman in contentment or in discontentment, it's much more focused on, I know who I was created to be, and I know whether I'm expressing that or not. That's the difference. Now, expression is a kind of doing, like the doing and the being, like I said, you can't really separate it. But you're going to be more focused on one side or the other, and I think it throws people off. When we talk about a calling, we'll tend to talk about a calling in a masculine way in the church, and I think it confuses a lot of women because they're like, when I talk to God about the future, I don't see myself doing things. But I see myself in a very different place. I am a different person, and it's having a different effect on the people around me. It's like, of course, you're a woman. That's how that's landing. That's where the focus is. That's where your heart leaps to. And with a man, like, We could talk about who he is in Christ, his being, and it's not that it's not true. It's not that it doesn't help him. It's not that time needs to be spent there. That's foundational stuff. But he can't live there. He can't spend all his time focusing on who he is and ignoring the question of what he's called to do. It damages him to do that. And that's a problem in the church nowadays. We have a feminized church. And what that means is that we have, for a long time, we've been trying to please the people who are showing up at church, and it's women. And so now it's a self-fulfilling thing because we're out there trying to please the people that are there, and they're women. The men come in and they go, I don't know, what's the complaint that a man would have that go to church? They go, well, it seems like this is a lot about like who we are and how we feel and expressing who we are. Like it's worship and it's a sermon, but it's kind of like, it's not really action-oriented. It's like, who are we in Christ? And let's express that better. And then we get together and we talk to each other, and it's very expressive. And the guy sees all that and he goes, look, I just feel awkward here. I don't know what to say. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Because nobody's talking about doing anything. That's the unbalanced point, right? Contentment has that division in it. And it's the same thing. It's the human thing is the same thing. But there's that little difference in focus that'll throw people off a lot. Like men don't need to sit through some sort of a sermon or a lecture where somebody goes, it's about who you are and being who you are and expressing yourself. Like it's not that none of that's true. It's just not going to resonate with a guy very well. It's not what his heart really cares about. It's not what he's wired to be about. And if you go and you preach a sermon about doing to women, there's only going to be one or two women that are really going to resonate with that. And it's mostly going to be out of trauma. Then I need to do something to be enough because me just being here isn't enough. It's a trauma. It's not how it's supposed to be. But most women are going to hear that and be like, all right, enough of that. And that's not a bad thing. This is how the body of Christ is balanced against themselves. So you think about it, at creation, God creates man and woman, male and female, in his image and according to his likeness. What we are, what we're going to do, is always going to be a reflection of who God is. The more you're in line with God's will for your life, whatever your individual calling may be, whether you're called to be an apostle or a prophet or a pastor, a teacher, or a encourager, whatever your calling might be, whatever it is, you going in that direction is going to be you conforming to the likeness of Christ, because that's what you were created to be in his image, according to his likeness. That's what it's all about. And that's what we're hungry for. That's what we feel discontented about. And when Jesus comes into our life, this is what it's like. It's like the way it says it in 2 Corinthians is God's presence is like treasure that we carry. His glory is like treasure we carry in jars of clay. And that's what we are. We are like a lamp that God designed, and he puts his fire inside of it and it shines out. He's like, we have these little, they look like diamonds. They're not diamonds, but I mean, it's like a piece of cut glass. It's a prism thing. We hang it on a wire. We have them in our house. We hang them in the window, and when the sun hits them, it makes rainbows. Like it shoots little rainbow spots all over. We hung them up because our daughter Maggie really likes them. And it's an interesting thing. Like it's just yellow sunlight, right? But when it hits this piece of glass, like these colors come out of it that you would never see if you looked at it by itself. And that's like God. Like no matter how good you are at connecting with God, there is so much about God. There's like an infinity of things about God, right? He's infinite. Like you think about it, God's personality is infinite. You could get to know him forever, and you're never going to come. He's always going to be shocking you with something new that you never knew about him. He's like that ray of sunshine that has every color of the rainbow in it, but you can't really see that. they blend together, and there's just this powerful light. Like, try to look at the sun, you can't stare, right? It's powerful. That's what you walk away with. And what God did when He created you, when He created me, when He created us, is He made us like little prisms, and when the light goes through you, this color pops out that you would have never recognized in God Himself. But when He works through you, and you live out the thing you're called to do, you reveal God in a way that creation would have never been able to see in God Himself. He's revealing Himself through us. And I personally believe it's not like we're each everything about, like, how could you be an image of God in everything that He is? It's impossible. That would be an infinite image. But He takes a sliver of Himself and makes that the focus of who you are. The way Danny is like God, the way he's been made in His image and likeness is different than how Robert was made in the image and likeness of God. It's a completely different color that God is revealing. That's what the body of Christ is. Many different gifts. We come together and we're like a stained glass window. We're each a different color, but it builds this great image, and we understand God better through that than we would if it was just a blazing light behind a cloud. A pillar of fire leading us in the desert. Like, we have that experience, but we're supposed to have this experience too. That's what we were created to be. And what you're created to do is directly connected out of expressing that thing. And so when we look at that, it seems like simple enough, right? Let's just ask God who we are. Let's ask God what we're supposed to be doing. Let's ask God if we're doing a good job. That's what my first thought was when you kind of grab on to something like this. But it doesn't work. I've tried it enough times that you just jump on it like that, it's not going to work. And so I've been trying to figure it out. For years I've been trying to figure out, talking to God about it. It's one of those things. Your cup is only big enough to take so much. And sometimes God's like, well, that's as much as you're going to understand about it right now. You got to be like, can't really complain. It's not His fault, it's my fault. And later on, maybe your heart stretches. You can receive a little bit more. You can understand a little bit more. But I'm going to give you what I got so far, and I think it's really helpful. I'm going to draw. I don't know. I never know if visuals really help that much. Maybe you picture it better in your head than I can draw it. But I'm going to describe contentment as like a triangle. I'm going to do a man triangle. Later on, I'll do a female triangle because I think there is a slight difference between the two. This is going to be the man triangle. Now, at the bottom, the base of this triangle, I'm going to put my writing here, but that says ability. That's really terrible. I'm not good at it.
The other pen has a.
It's not the pen. I'm not good at writing like this, but you can write other things. Maybe the word that connects with you better is strength, or competence, or whatever. But at the bottom we have ability. Now on this ascending slope of the triangle, we're going to have responsibility. And we could also call that like discipline. It's really, I guess it's like a skill you got to practice. You know, like a professor or something who's drawing on a chalkboard all the time. I feel like I'm a doctor. Look at this. I should be going to medical school or shit like that. So this is the ascending side, so I want you to get the direction here. That's where we're going. And then on the descending slope, we have respectability. Leaning into the person because of how that is. That's an art. Okay. But we might, I'm doing something there to help you memorize the words. So ability, responsibility, respectability. Let's see where we're going with it. But you might connect more with like a word like honor or just respect in general. So, when you're looking at how contentment operates inside of a man, it operates like this. A man has abilities, giftings that God has given him. And when he uses those responsibly, then there's respectability. And that respectability is this sense of value, of honor that comes upon your heart that we call contentment. This is how it works with a man, essentially. You have abilities, you have giftings, you have strength, something God has given you. The way that hits, like God depositing something inside, the way that hits for men is usually very action-oriented. Remember, it's doing, right? So it's strength, it's competence, it's ability, it's gifting. That's the kind of words we use to describe it. That's where man looks in that direction. And then there is a responsibility, and this is what keeps you up at night. You might be aware that you have giftings, or you hope you have giftings, or you have a feeling there might be a gifting in there somewhere. Maybe you got a word about a gifting, but you sit there and you say, but am I using it? And am I using it the way God wants me to? The big cardinal sins here for a man is passivity, procrastination. I know I have the ability, I'm not using it. It could also be I'm using it selfishly or abusively. I'm using it for myself, and I'm using it in a way that's actually doing harm to the kingdom of God or harm to people in my life. I have this skill, but I'm using it in a way that I shouldn't be. And anyway, these things add up. Ability plus responsibility equals the respectability. That's how it kind of flows. Now here's the thing. I don't expect anyone to be blown away by this because we all know this, right? Like maybe you wouldn't have drawn it as a triangle, maybe you wouldn't have used this verbiage, but you know this, right? Like every man, like think about it. You went up to a man and you start talking to him about his ability, that's going to be a powerful topic. Like if you want to set a man off, you could just come up and say, you suck, bro, you suck at this. Like it really doesn't matter what you're talking about. It could be something that's not even important to him. Like you suck at changing tires. Boom, this dude's going to blow up. Now if you went to a woman and said, you suck at something, you lack this ability, she'd be like, yeah. And if I want to do that, I should probably go take a class. Like, it's just not going to hit the same way. Like, this is going to go to the heart of a man. You talk about a man with his responsibility. That's going to go to the heart of a man. You're responsible to this, but you're not doing it. And if we talk to a man about respect, honor, how much respect or honor he feels like he deserves in his life, there's reason these are powerful areas of topic to us because it goes to the core of who we are. When we're talking about these things, we're touching that question mark inside of that man. We're touching the very root of his discontentment and how he's struggling in some way to make it work. He's trying to, and this is the crazy thing, is we all know this, but it doesn't help us, right? We know this and it doesn't help us. Because why? Because if we went to a man and we said, describe your strengths, describe your abilities, describe your gifting, and they sat down and talked, even in the church, and they sat down and talked about it, and then you looked around at the people who know him best, the people who pray for him the most, they would kind of be like, he's a little bit off. Nobody would be like, yeah, he nailed it. He has sober judgment about what his abilities are. No one like, it was a little bit prideful. He was a little bit thinking too highly of himself, or that was a little I can't do it. I'm like humility, but it's not really humility. It's like self-despondency or something. That's always going to be true. Incredibly rare to find somebody and he can describe his strengths and it's actually right. And that's a big deal, right? If you go through life thinking you have abilities you don't have, that's not a recipe for success. It's also not a recipe for success to go and try to fulfill your destiny and you don't use the abilities you have because you don't know they're there. Either way, you're kind of screwing yourself, right? You pretend like you can do something. Think, I can fly. Jump off a roof. You die. That's not good to think you have an ability you don't have. But if you can fly, and God wants you to like fly someplace, and you're like, I'm going to walk because I can't fly, that's not good either, right? Really out there example, but that's going on. Responsibility, that's what we're talking about. To know what you are supposed to do, and then do it. What if you don't know what your responsibility is? What if you're haunted by a constant sense of I'm missing something that I'm supposed to be doing? I'm responsible for something and it's falling apart right now and I don't even know what it is. Men are haunted by that all the time. Because you're not really supposed to be answering these questions on your own. And when you try to, even when you have an answer, you don't have any faith that it's the right answer. You just hope that it is. And fear that it's not. The same thing with respectability. You go to someone, what kind of respect? Where do you think you should be sitting at the table of honor? And that guy's either going to be like, I'm at the top, or I'm at the bottom. I'm a loser. You know, it's never going to be where he really is. It's always going to be off. Now, why is that? Because, and I'm going to try to do a geometry parable here, and I never took geometry, so this could be completely wrong. But I think it's right, and I think it makes a good point. The point is if you look at just the sides of the triangle, right? Just look at the sides. It's just a line. That line could go anywhere and come from anywhere. You just draw a line. You take away the ends of that line. What is it? It could be coming from anywhere. It could be going anywhere. It can curve and roll all over the place. What makes a triangle a triangle? We say it's the three sides, but we really mean that it's three corners. And I'm pretty sure that's in geometry. They study this little point of divergence. That's how you define what kind of triangle it is, by how far these lines diverge. The angle of attack in these spots is going to define what kind of triangle it is, whether it's isosceles or whatever. It's going to be from that. So my point is that these things have focal points, but we don't know what they are most of the time. For example, we looked at this and said, all right, what's this focal point? And let's just look at the evidence here. It's what your responsibility is aimed at, and it's where your respect, the judgment of respect and honor comes from. What is that? Well, worldly people might have a lot of different answers, wrong ones. But for a Christian, there's only one right answer for who do we serve, who are we responsible to, and who awards the crowns and the honor. There's only one person there, right? It's your Creator. And actually, it's the only sensible answer. People make up other answers for this pinnacle in their life, but they're meaningless. They'll try to put themselves up there. Well, I'm responsible to myself, and I have self-respect. It's like, no, you don't. That just means you don't. It doesn't make any sense. Who are you responsible? The only thing that you could possibly be responsible, if these ideas even really exist, and they're not totally invented, then the only thing it could mean is that you're responsible to the one who made you to live the way he intended you to live. And the only person who has a right to judge whether you are a creation that's fulfilling the will of the Creator is the Creator. Creation and judgment are two sides of the same thing. You can't make something and then not judge it. You can't really judge something if you weren't the one who made it. That's the guy who ultimately stands there and goes, well, does it do what I wanted it to do? You can't make a sandwich and not judge whether that sandwich is what you wanted it to be. And other people can have an opinion about it, but you're like, I made this sandwich for me. I'm the one who says whether pickles on peanut butter is good or not. It's me that gets to choose that, not anybody else. The Creator's the focal point, but if the focal point isn't right, what happens? If you're not focusing on the fact that you're responsible to God, you're focusing on responsibility anywhere. You could be bouncing between different ideas. Of course you're foggy about what your responsibility is. And if your honor doesn't come from God, if this isn't set here, if you deviate this, then the respectability deviates. You're chasing honor from God today, you're chasing honor from the world tomorrow, you're chasing your own self-respect over here, and the wrong answer doesn't work. You're confused. Rightly so. It's way off. Now let's try to define this one. The respectability comes down and it lands here. And then the abilities come out here. What's here? You're here. That's you. Right? That's a focal point. Now how I put it is I called it the core of you. You could call it the heart, or to keep with our little rhyming scheme here, you could use the Greek cardia, which is your heart. That's another focal point. If you don't know who you are, does that affect your self-respect? Absolutely it does. If you have the wrong idea of who you are. Isn't that what we're talking about? We go, how much respect do you think? Well, this guy has a completely delusional idea of who he is. Then he thinks, I'm the man, I deserve a ton of respect. Well, I suck, I don't deserve any respect. And it's this deviation that throws off his sense of what respect, how much respect he should have. And the thing is, there's a huge difference between if you get respect from God, like this is in balance, and you get respect from God. God is honoring you. You know that you're doing what you're created to do. You might know that you're worthy of a lot of respect and not get any of it. You might be getting rejection on all sides, but it doesn't hit you the same way because you know what you deserve. The reason why disrespect and rejection hurt is because this is a question mark. I don't really know whether I deserve the honor I think I do. So when somebody says you're a piece of crap, there's a part of me that goes, that might be true. I don't really know. Deviation here, and throw that all off. Now what about this spot? Where do your abilities focus and your responsibilities aim from? Towards God. Like here's God's responsibility. I want you to do this, and this is, and again, when you do it, it's going to be this way. But it's God's handing you responsibility. He's also giving you ability. And where your ability and your responsibility meet is what? Your calling. Now here's the thing. We don't really think about that stuff in this way. We don't. And so we don't realize that if there's distortion on any of these points, everything else gets screwed up. It falls apart. It can't work any other way. And we don't realize that by screwing up one of these things, it chain reacts and screws up the other ones. So you have to be getting all three of these points right to one degree or another to move forward. And then to move forward a little bit further, to get this to flow correctly, ability to responsibility to respectability, and go like this, each step is going to be a purification and a deeper understanding of these three focal points. In layman's terms, you're going to have to get closer to who God is, closer to who you are, and closer to what you were created to do. That's going to have to be a constant revelation to you to grow in these areas. That's the connection. Now think about the reality of how this can go wrong. If you misunderstand who you are, then you're not going to receive respect from God, even if He's trying to give it to you. And this is why I made a point of saying it's the core, it's the cardia, it's the center of you. Because when we look at ourselves, usually we look at the outer man. We look at our bodies, we look at the words we say, the things we do, the decisions we make, or we look at the soul, which is part of the outer man, which is our thoughts, our emotions, our decisions. That's what we look at. In fact, people say that all the time. What are you? You're your memories, you're your thoughts. If you get dementia or Alzheimer's, they go, well, you're losing everything that you are. But if you're around a person that has lost their memory, you realize this person didn't stop being them. It's not like a computer and they wipe their hard drive. You wouldn't care about that person anymore. They'd be dead. You wouldn't really care. The horrific part of dementia and these other diseases is that person's still in there. They're just incapable of really knowing or expressing themselves. That's the trauma of it. You know they're suffering inside still. You know they're still there. They're not gone. They're still here in this crippled neurology that won't allow them to be who they really are. That's what's terrible about it. So what does that mean? That means that you're not your body, and you're not really your soul. That's how it feels, but that's not the truth of it, because what is your soul doing? It's there to give expression to who you are. So that's where you look. It's like, where do you look to see yourself physically? Well, I look in a mirror, and that's how I can see myself. But that's not you, that's a mirror. If you thought that the mirror was you, and you came from a different angle, and you go, oh my goodness, I look like a towel hanging on the shower door. Oh, wait a minute, I'm just looking in the mirror at a different angle. But that happens psychologically. Like your thoughts, your emotions, your choices are supposed to reflect your spirit, who you really are, and it's supposed to come from your heart. Your thoughts and your imaginations are supposed to be expressing the deep things of your heart that God created and shaped to reflect that perfect beam of light, to be that perfect piece of that stained glass window. That's what's supposed to come out of your heart, and it's supposed to be expressed.
Can I shut this up? Sorry, bro.
That's the wrong one. It's a long one. You're trying to turn off the light.
No, the fan.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, bro.
So that's what our soul is supposed to be doing. It's supposed to be expressing who we really are. From the heart, there should be an overflow that goes through the mind, that goes through the imagination, that goes through our emotions. It's supposed to be an expression of who we are. But the soul is made to express really whatever we're aiming in at. That's why we can talk, in the Bible, they can talk about carnal people. What does that mean? It means their soul is aimed at their body. And so the things that the way we describe it is the body's fleshy, but when the soul is focused on the body, the soul becomes fleshy. That's what it's expressing. And then you might think, I'm fleshy. That's not really true. You're not fleshy. Your spirit is never fleshy. It's just you've turned your soul to focus on your flesh, and you've followed sin into its full play. You've let it grow, and you've let it become the thing that's percolating in your thought, in your mind, in your emotion. You've let selfishness rule, and now you look at it and you go, ugh, that's not right. You go, like, have you ever watched a really gross movie? Maybe it was a horror movie. I don't know, just some movie was just like, ugh. Like, I remember I watched a movie called Requiem for a Dream. Have you ever seen that movie? Don't watch it. I guess the moral's good, don't do drugs. But you don't want to see that. You can just say, I'm not going to do drugs. You don't have to see why. I watched it. I was on drugs. Didn't actually help me. But it grossed me out. It grossed me out at the time when I watched it. And if you've ever watched a movie like that, it's like it's in you, right? It's in. Why? Because you gave your soul over to this movie for an hour and a half. You got absorbed in it. Your thoughts are following in that. Your emotion is following that. You've absorbed it, and then you walk away and you go, I feel like that. You know? We make a joke that when we watch scary movies, I need to go watch Princess Bride before I go to bed because I need to get this out of me, right? Well, you're saying, like, I let this express itself in me, and now it feels like it's part of me, and until I express something else, I can't really cleanse the chalkboard and get that out. In the Bible, there's a couple different options. There's the carnal man, which is the man whose soul is focused on his flesh. Then there's also the soulical man. And this is a man whose soul has turned in on itself. He's focused on his own thought. What he's thinking about now is based on what he was thinking about before. What he's feeling now is based on what he felt before. He's like a feedback on an amp. You're putting the mic right to the speaker, and it's creating its own weird noise. And this is actually like if you have somebody who struggles with like kind of a bipolar bounce in their life, they're manic or they're depressive, that's why. Because they feed off of whatever emotion's already there. It's like a feedback loop, right? So they wake up in the morning and a bird chirps and they go, that's nice. Yeah, that's nice. And then it's like they feed off of the niceness. The nice feeds the next thought about nice, and it just, because they're plugging their soul into their own soul, it just feedbacks up until they're like, it's awesome, look at how beautiful. And people are like, whoa, it's not that nice. But that's what happens. You ramp up into a manic spike. And then what happens? What happens is some sad thought comes along. You see a little bee beating against the window trying to, oh, that's kind of sad. And you start thinking about it a little bit more. And it's just a little soft sound, but when you stick the mic against the speaker, it just, and it just spikes out all of a sudden. All of a sudden, you are so depressed. And you crash. And the reason for that isn't like, people just think it's about the highs and lows. That's not what it's about. It's what you're feeding your thoughts with, what you're feeding your emotions on. If you focus your emotions on your emotions, then you're always going to have a feedback loop. You want to have a panic attack? Just focus your fear on the panic. So you're afraid of your own fear, and you'll just, boom, you'll blow into it every time. You're not supposed to plug your soul into your soul. That's not supposed to be the focus. And your body's not supposed to be the focus. What does Paul say in Corinthians? He says we're supposed to be spiritual men. That's men where we focus our soul on our spirit, that part of us that can connect with God, the glass lantern that God can put His Holy Spirit fire in that illuminates. This is where we're made in the image of God, and it's supposed to be expressed through the soul. It's supposed to be colored with thoughts and emotions to express what it is, and our bodies are supposed to walk out and make that a tangible reality in this world through our thoughts and through our deeds and through our words and through our actions. That's what's supposed to happen. That's what it's supposed to be. But that's not what it is. For every fallen person, that's not what it is. And Paul is speaking to Christians most of the time, and he's saying, you're still soulical. You're still carnal. You still set your soul to focus on these things. And so that's still the pattern that's being manifested in your life. Though Christ is in you, though you have every treasure in heaven, you haven't set your soul upon the gifts of God. That's not where your focus is. That's not what you're trying to express in your life. You're not trying to walk in Christ and walk in His anointing. So that's not the fruit that's coming out of you. You're not abiding in the grafting that God has done. You're abiding in yourself, or you're abiding in the world, or you're abiding in your flesh, and that's what's coming out of you. Now the problem is if your whole life you've been rejecting and burying your spirit, rejecting and burying your heart, that's where you're going to connect with your spirit, through your conscience, through your heart. And if your whole life your conscience was screaming, you're sending us to hell, stop sinning, and you're like, I don't know how to stop, and I don't know how to make it right that I did this before, and so eventually you just bury that part of yourself. You take your heart out and you bury it because you don't want to hear it anymore, and you say, I'm not going to make my life about the spiritual part of me that's suffering. I'm going to make my life about the fleshly part of me that can have fun anyway. And I know the house is on fire. I know the ship is sinking. I know I'm going to die like a drowned rat in the end, but I don't want to think about it right now. I might as well enjoy the ride. And that's the best that a sinner can do without God in their life to try to save them. That's the best you can do. So what happens to you is your soul is expressing everything that you aren't really. But that's who you think you are. And even right now, you think you know who you are. But really, you're just looking at the mirror, but the mirror is tilted to reflect part of you that isn't really part of you. It's the world. It's the flesh. It's your soul feedbacking on some worldly idea, and you think that's you, but it's not you. It's a mirror. That's what your soul is. It's a mirror, and it can be focused on the real you, or it can be focused on some false identity you're trying to build. You try to build something here, off to one side or to the other. It's either a prideful fantasy, this is who I am, I'm awesome, I'm a god. Or it's like, I'm a loser, feel sorry for me, I'm a victim, pity me. Or whatever you do, if it's not the real you, then how does that deviate? For one, forget having a relationship with God. You can't have a relationship with a person you made up. Can you imagine? Can you imagine if I went to school, and when I was in school, a lot of the kids in my class were like Mexican immigrant kids, right? Strong accents, totally different cultural place than where I was coming from. And you hear about this, like white kids that grow up in Hawaii, right? They don't want to be white; they want to be Hawaiian. They get picked on for it. And can you imagine? But this may be a funny example. Can you imagine if I went like that guy in American Me, Orderly Holmes, and I just went into it, right? That's not who I am. That's not where I came from. I don't have the same home situation. I'm like, see you later, Mom. And then I go, and then I like button the top button, and I fan out the cape, and I go, Orderly, what's up? And I just pretend to be this person because that's how I'm going to get acceptance. Can you imagine if I did that my whole life? How would I feel? Knowing that this isn't really me, this is the mask I put on to get other people like me. Even when they like me, they don't like me. They like this person I invented. And then imagine if I went to God and all I do is I got my gangster on. I know people like this. They've spent their whole life creating a gangster persona to be a tough guy in the streets. They come to the Lord, they're like, oh yeah, Lord. And they got this whole hard man thing. And it's like, that's not who Jesus made. You'll never have a relationship with Jesus pretending to be that guy.
Yeah.
You need to get vulnerable. You need to get real. You need to do the scariest, most courageous thing you can do, which is figure out who you really are that you've been running from your whole life because you didn't think it was strong enough. You thought it was too weak. It got picked on. When people saw the real strength in that little boy, that's what they attacked. When they saw the beauty in that little girl, that's what they made fun of. And the very part of you that God made to shine, the devil lured you into rejecting and burying and hiding away and inventing something else to replace it. The devil's got a plan for all these 3 points. To throw you off, and it can be that simple. You've rejected your heart. You put something else in the center, some other idea of who you are. And now when God tries to love you, when He tries to connect to you, when He tries to even tell you a good job, He's not. It's landing way over there where your heart is. It's beating this piece of ground where you buried your heart a century ago. And when you try to say, God, what about this? What about this? He goes, I don't like it. And you go, you don't like me. He's like, that's not you. That's never who you were. You've been pretending to be this person so long, you really think that's you. Can you imagine? There's actors that, I think sometimes they're just being dramatic because it makes it look cool. Like, I got so deep in the role, I didn't know who I was anymore. But I think it really happens. You know? Like there's actors who play like Americans, and they're British, and they do it for like 10 years, and then they're like, my accent's funny now. Like, they don't have the right accent anymore. They're like, man, you were pretending to be that guy for a long time. You forgot how to talk the way you grew up talking. Like that's you're like a tick. You're like a bug in a rug, man. You're dug in. But we've all done that. We all made up somebody who we thought would be our best chance. We looked at the people around us who were doing okay. We said, I'm going to be like him in this, and I'm going to be like her in that. And we picked the pieces and we sewed a little Frankenstein mask together of what we thought would give us the best chance. And we've been wearing it our whole lives. We wear it even when we look in the mirror. We don't even let ourselves see what's under there because we're terrified. Your greatest hope is that someone would see who you really are and like it. And your greatest fear is someone would see who you really are and hate it. And so you're in this weird place of saying, I don't want anyone to know, but I need someone to know. And so you try to make another version of yourself so you can have your cake and eat it too. I can hide the whole time below this mask, but still get the love. But then when you get the love, you have imposter syndrome all over it. It's not really penetrating. The whole world loves you, but they don't really know who you are. They just know the person you pretend to be. You know what that does to your relationship with God? You know what that does with every relationship? There are people who love you for who you are. You're not that good. Your mask isn't that complete. It's like sowing fig leaves. You're not hiding anything, man. We see right through it. But you don't know that we can. So your wife loves you, but you don't think it's for that. You don't think it's for your heart. You think it's because I'm a funny guy, or I'm good looking, or I've done this, or I've done that. Your wife, you love your wife, but she thinks it's because she's good at things. Man, she's really good at this, or man, she's really productive at that, or man, I used to be really pretty when we first got married, and I'm getting older and having kids. You can see, go right down into her psychology, that might be slipping away. And you're like, don't you know why I love him? You didn't figure out what I really loved? It's like, no, I never showed anybody that. That's what we do with God. God created you. He knows what's in there. But if you never show it to him willingly, it doesn't matter that he's got God vision and he knows it already. Because you'll be like, he only knows what I've shown him. He doesn't really know who I am. That's what, like Peter, right? Depart from me, God. I'm a sinful man. Like Jesus doesn't know who Peter is. I made you, dude. I know who you are. But you can't really believe it. You can't accept the fact that you're that naked before God, that he really does know who you are. You believe the mask works. You don't even look beyond it. So when God does look into you, it's really scary because you don't know what he's seeing. But you can imagine how bad it must be. Not only can you not receive the respectability of God, but what does that do to your ability, to your strengths, to the giftings that God has? If you don't see yourself right, if the cup that you made to replace the cup that God created you to be is wrong, then how the heck does God give you the giftings he wants to give you? How do you walk in the anointing if you're walking in the wrong personality? Isn't that going to throw it off? You're going to step out and you're going to throw on a certain thing and it's going to take you right out of it every time. It's like it's not the right cup to receive because that's your heart. You can't get away without having your heart. You replace it with something else. You replace it with your intellect. You replace it with raw emotionalism. You replace it with stoic willfulness. You replace it by being the funny guy or the serious guy or whatever. But it's not who God created you to be. How do you walk in your ability? How do you plug into your calling? If you're not the person he created to do the job, you're pretending to be somebody else. What happens? The whole thing gets thrown off, right? The whole thing can't function correctly. If you don't have these focal points right, you're not going to get any of the rest of it right. This defines the lines in between. As you understand the core of who you are, as you understand who God really is, as you understand what your calling is actually about, that's how these things get lined up. That's where you discover your abilities, your strengths, and your giftings. That's where you discover what your real responsibility is and what it isn't. And that's where you begin to know the peace and the contentment that only God can give when you're walking this way. Nothing else can replace God. God's the only one who can answer that question. What am I created to do? Only God can tell you. Am I doing it? Only God can judge that. And only his voice in your heart saying that will bring contentment. And if you have a question mark in here instead of an exclamation point, that's going to haunt you and ruin you your whole life. It's the most important thing that you could have. Now I want to throw the woman triangle in here because it's important. Even if you're not a woman, I bet you got one around that you would like to understand better. Maybe you make that husband mistake of trying to fix her problems and not even fixing her problems would help, because what you need to be doing is supporting her and finding contentment in her life. She needs to know who she is too. She needs to know who she was created to be and know that she's truly expressing that she is what God wanted her to be. And if she doesn't have that, she's not going to be content, and her life's going to be a mess, and it's going to send up red flags. Your wife is discontent, it's going to punch you in the heart every time you see her face. You're like, this doesn't feel good. This doesn't feel right. I'm failing her. I know I'm failing her. And you might go and grab onto one of her problems and try to fix it. That's not only going to frustrate you, that's going to frustrate her. That's not the way to help. But if you can focus and figure out this, and if you can let God take the charge on how you're supposed to help, because you can't, you don't lead the horse to the water, you can't make him drink. It's a journey each person has to take. You can support her in that, and believe me, that will feel so much better. So what I want to show you, the points are the same, right? Those don't change. Focal points are the same. But the sides are different. Let me show you how it is with a woman. That's supposed to say beauty. Looks like brevity or something. Beverly? No, it's beauty. Beauty's at the bottom, and I know a lot of women would have a knee-jerk reaction to that, but it's true. This is expression. Expression. Express yourself. And this I call cherishing. And it's the same thing with seeds, okay? That's creative. That's the core, that's the calling. For women, it's like that. Cherishing. Cherishing. So what this means is like, I know, and I know this from many women in my life, there's a lot of women, when you talk about beauty, they go, I'm not into that. They're like, that's not important to me. That's so limiting to talk of, like, my value comes from my beauty. Come on. I'm not saying physical beauty here. Not any more than I'm saying physical strength here. I'm not saying if you're a real man, you're going to be able to bench 375. Like, I'm not saying that. But as a kid, that's the natural metaphor, right? A little boy, how many little boys want to be like shrimpy? Like, I want to be little and gangly. I want to just be elbows and knees. That's what I want to grow up and look like. I want to look like that geeky guy right there. No, they point at somebody who's like ripped and super strong, and that's the person. I want to be like him. Why? He's strong. And as you get older, you realize that's more metaphorical than literal. I don't want to be a strong guy who's a coward. And I don't even care if I'm physically weak, as long as my heart is strong, as long as I'm capable and I'm courageous, and that's what I want. And that's true with girls, right? And an immature girl would look at a man and say, I'm into him because he's got abs. But you get a little bit older in life and you realize, I don't want a guy with abs if he's going to dump me and cheat on me after we've been married for a couple of years because he's vain and weak on the inside. Then I'd rather have a guy with a dad bod but has a heart of steel. He's so strong and he's never afraid and he can always handle it, and I've never felt safer than when I'm with this guy, and he can handle things, and I know no matter what comes, I will be able to shelter under his wing. You get a little bit of maturity, you get a little bit of wisdom, that's what's going on. Same thing with men. Maybe when you were young, you're like, I'm looking for someone who's hot, and that's all I care about. And then you meet some of the people who married the girl just because she had a nice booty or something, and you married the girl, and then you find out, man, she's a tramp. You know, like, she's horrible. Like, this guy's life was ruined because he thought with the wrong brain, right? Why? Because it's not exterior beauty isn't what it is. I think it's nice. Like, I think we've all done well on that. Well, all of our wives are beautiful, but I mean, that's not what you're really looking for. You're looking for somebody who's going to be beautiful no matter how old and gray and wrinkly they get. Just like a wife is looking for a man who's going to be strong no matter how frail he gets physically. The strength isn't something that life can touch, that aging can touch. unfading beauty is what God talks about when he talks about the beauty of women. He says, look at the ancients and how they kept themselves beautiful. It wasn't with makeup and pearls and braided hair. That's not where the beauty came from. It was from their spirit. Have you ever met a woman that's spiritually beautiful? A trick question, because they all are. It's just how well they're connected with it. But have you ever met somebody in that place where you're like, I'm looking at this woman, and I know she's not physically pretty, right? But there's something about her that I could sit and talk to her all day long. And it may not, it could be like an old lady. I'm not saying that you were attracted to that person in a romantic way, but it could have been a woman where you sit down and they refresh you and strengthen you, and there's so much to them. You know? We talk about grandmothers. How many grandmothers are just like, whoa, she's smoking hot for a grandma? Not usually. That's not what's going on, right? But how many of them are incredibly beautiful people that you'd love to sit down and talk with, that there's something I want to spend time with this woman. And it's not because she's strong. It's because she truly is beautiful. Just not in a way that most of us have eyes to see in our shallow and depraved world. That's what I'm talking about down here with beauty. Beauty is something that gets something done without doing anything. It's just there and it changes things. Just expressing beauty changes things. And women, they'll say they don't care about beauty, but then they'll go get their nails done. Who are they doing that for? They're doing it for themselves. They're not doing like men are like, man, do your nails. I like some nails done. Like, no, men don't care about nails. Why do women go and get their hair styled? They're doing this thing. And not just that, why do they beautify everything? We need some fresh paint in here, and it would be great if we got a ficus in that corner. And they're just, why? Because they understand the power of beauty. Men don't. We don't. We love it. It's really necessary for us. We starve for it. But go into a bachelor pad. Like, go to a couple of young guys living on their own and realize these men only care about survival. That's all they're thinking about. Can I sleep on a mattress on the floor without sheets? Yes, I can. That will work. They don't do anything else. That's it. Can I get away without having a washer and dryer? Sure. I'll just throw my clothes in the shower when I get in to take a shower. Sun them up a little bit, hang with them, whatever works, You open up you're like, what are you eating for dinner? Oh, popcorn and canned peaches. That's why it works. Men are survivalists, and you need survivalists. That's what they do. They carve out the ability to survive in a situation where we would be dead otherwise. But who wants to live in a survivalist bunker? Nobody wants to live there unless he has a wife that comes in and makes it habitable, that makes it a place where we can thrive and it feels good to be there. You know what sucks about war? There's no women there. It's great, you're fulfilling missions and you're doing meaningful things, but it's hard to come home to a stinking tent full of other dudes and it smells like gym socks and there's no beauty anywhere. It's just mud and dust and death and hardship, and eventually men will start saying, I don't know why I'm fighting anymore. I don't get it. And there's something that happens when you have that beautiful wife in your life that when you can't see a reason for fighting, you go and spend some time with her and her beauty refreshes you in a way. And it's not necessarily even her physical beauty, like sex could be part of it or not. You could just be sitting and talking with her, and there's something about what a woman has, that feminine something. It really is beyond words. It's glorious, and it changes things without doing anything. It's just there. Men are like the arm of God. That's what we're trying to be like, the power that changes things. Women are like the face of God. You experience God's glory, everything changes, and it's not because He did anything, it's just He was there, and how awesome He is changed everything. What's more powerful, God's arm or God's face? I dare you to try to figure it out. I don't think we can. It depends on the situation. There's a balance there, and that's what men and women do. I remember putting together a nursery for my daughter. We had a spare room. We're going to turn it into a nursery. You know what I did to get the nursery ready? I ripped up the floor and repaired the subfloor. I put things on the power socket so you couldn't stick a fork in there, get electrocuted, and I rebuilt the shelving unit inside so that it could hold a lot of stuff. You know what my wife and her mother did with that room? They painted it. They made a mural of mountains on this side, and they made a whole wall devoted to Maggie. Hello, beautiful girl, welcome to the world. And flowers were placed in there, and they hung shiny things in the windows, and they like, I put together the IKEA furniture, and then they designed this whole thing. And this is a poof ball. We're going to put a poof ball. What is it? I don't know what it does. It doesn't really do anything. It doesn't look nice. Yeah, I guess it does look nice, actually. I can tell you, at the end of my job, a kid could sleep in there and be safe. There was a white mattress and a white crib from IKEA that smelled like plastic. There was a floor that you couldn't fall through. A possum wasn't going to come up in the night and maul my kid. They weren't going to get electrocuted. But man, it was an ugly, empty place before my wife put the finishing touches on it. When it was done, it's like, this is a very kid place for a kid. And that's the truth. If a church is run completely by women, there's no men in there, it misses the point. It's super comfortable, especially for women. But you look around and you go, I don't know what's the mission. Why are you guys, you just existing to exist? It's just to be pretty, it's just to be nice. But if a men-run church without any women involved, what is it? It's like a muddy pup tent in the trenches of World War I. You're just like, this place. I understand, and it's nice, and we're fighting a battle, and it's good, and they're suffering for the right reasons, which is good. But how are we going to do this for more than a week? Where do we go to nest and be rebuilt and refreshed and strengthened? Where do the injured go to heal? Where do the young go to learn and be built up? This is out of balance. There's the two sides of these things. And the thing that we've done to women in our culture, and we acted like it was empowerment. We went up and said, you can do whatever a man can do. Mm-hmm. But really what that meant is, you're not enough unless you do what a man can do. There's something shameful about you if you're not out there being masculine and doing what a man can do. It's not enough to be. When we went to women who are raising their children, and we said, what you're doing is not important. You should go get a job. What do you think? She's raising the next generation. That's not a job. That's why it's complete hypocrisy when they say, oh, teacher's job's important. Teacher's job's important, but mom's job isn't important? What a joke. But you talk to the women who choose to stay home and raise their kids or do something. They are so shamed by other women. And other men, they're just like, oh, you poor little thing, like they keep you chained to a stove, barefoot, making sandwiches for the men folk. Like, that's how we think of it. Like, there's this idea that it's not okay for you to be a woman and say, I don't want to do the man stuff. I don't want to. I have a man, he'll do the man stuff. I'm good with that arrangement. They won't accept that answer. And it's terrible. That's why women struggle with this. Because you say, like, you were created to be beautiful, and they know that's true, but they also have this little voice that the world has programmed in the back of their head that says, that's not enough. I gotta do stuff. I gotta get stuff done. I gotta perform enough to be loved. And it's like, no, you don't. I see it in my wife. To be clear, I've never met a woman in the West where that wasn't true. In the third world, you'll find very happy women. Like, and you're like, why is this woman so happy? She lives in filth and poverty, and this is so hard. And it's like, well, she's been given license to be who she is. She doesn't have to be anything else. She might not have all the pieces or all the understanding, but she can just focus on being who she is and expressing that, and that's all that matters to her. There's power in that. For a woman, the question is going to come down to what her beauty is, where it's at. It's the same thing with a man. If a man, he knows that he's supposed to be strong, and he looks at somebody else and says, I'm supposed to be like that guy. He's strong, I'm supposed to be like him. then what happens? Sometimes your gifting isn't the same as that guy. You don't have the same calling as him. You don't need the same abilities. So what happens is you say, I need to be strong right here in my life. And if you're not, which is possible, but that's not where your strength is, then you think you're weak. And you're not. You're strong in a completely different area than that guy, but you refuse to look outside of the tiny spot that maybe your dad made important, or maybe your friends at school made important, or you grabbed onto and said that's where you should be strong as a man. And so you're trying to shove it into that box, and that's not where your gifting is. That's not where your strength is. It happens the same way with women. They need to find where their beauty resides. That thing that when they express it, it changes the environment around them. It deepens the community. It blesses every relationship that they're in. It's prized. But if a woman has grabbed onto the wrong place and says, I need to be beautiful like this, and she's not beautiful in that area, that's not where her beauty is located, that's not where she shines, then what does she say? I'm ugly. I'm not beautiful. And she tries to reject the standard of beauty of her whole life in every way that she can. She tries to be utilitarian, functional. I can get stuff done. I can do a good job. And what are they saying? Look at the beautiful job I did. Call my job beautiful. And somehow that mask is going to splash a little bit of that on me. It's giving up on something you can't give up on. It's like saying, look how strong my argument is. That's not real strength. It needs to be you, or what's the point? It needs to be her, or what's the point? Not just because you have beauty, it needs to be expressed. That's what the heart of that doing, the heart of that responsibility is going to be for a woman, is as a responsibility to express her beauty. Now what are the two, screw-ups here? What are the two things that people say about a woman? They go, oh, she's like an ice queen, right? What does that mean? She hides her beauty. She doesn't express any of it. She's cold. Her heart's locked away. Well, what do they say? She's easy. She gives it to everybody. She's dirty. She just goes around and gives herself everywhere. It's the same thing as a man. It's just in a different field. Like, for a man, you're either a coward or a bully. Those are the two insults. Because you're like a monster or you're a weakling. That's how you offend a man. But if you're going to insult a woman, what do they use to insult a woman? They talk about her purity. They talk about either she's like a nun or a prude, like she's inaccessible. Maybe she doesn't even have any beauty. Maybe she's ugly. She's fat. They throw that stuff at them. Or she's so easy. She's so cheap. She doesn't have any value because she doesn't value herself. She gives it away to everyone. That's what happens. It's an immoderation of the expression. The woman is supposed to have a balance between modesty and seductive power to some degree. Her beauty is captivating and she needs to use it the right way. Not hide it, not deny it, not bury it, and not use it abusively or selfishly. A woman's supposed to use her beauty and her expression for what? Ultimately, who's it aimed at? Who's she responsible to? To God. How many women do you know, and this is what we did with men, right? But how many women do you know that have a correct understanding, a sober judgment of their beauty? That aren't investing in a completely wrong place. Reaching in a completely wrong place for it. How many women do you know that are they're obsessed with self-expression, right? But it'll be like, I'm just doing this to express myself. And what, a pottery class? Yeah. Isn't that what your friend did? How's that expressing yourself? What you did is you saw someone expressing themselves in a way you thought was beautiful and you thought you'd copy it and see if it worked for you. That's like some man saying, well, he looks strong and he's working out at the gym. I'm going to work out at the gym. It's going to make me feel strong. That's not how it works. The expression, when it's done right, comes down to what? Cherishing. What does to cherish mean? Cherish is when something is so precious in and of itself that you throw yourself on the sword to protect it. You surround it. It's like when there's gunfire and you throw yourself over the top of someone to protect them from the bullets. That's what cherishing is. This would not be appropriate for a man. That's not honor. You can't cherish a man. You can, but it's not going to be. He's going to feel like, what am I, a baby? Like, link shields with me, fight along my side. Let's fight back to back. Whatever you want to do, like, come alongside me, but don't protect me like I am incapable of strength myself. But for a woman, this is exactly what's supposed to happen. Her beauty is supposed to be cherished and protected. It's not a woman's job to protect her beauty. It's the man's job to protect her beauty. And that's what a woman deeply wants. The way a man wants honor, a woman wants to be cherished for her beauty. She wants someone to see her value and say, I will fight to protect this. Because it's essential to our community. It's essential to our children. It's essential to our marriage. It's essential to what God's doing in His church. And we're going to protect it no matter what. That's not just for husbands, that's for fathers over their daughters, that's elders looking over the women in their church in general. We need to protect this. Now when this cycle is working correctly with a woman, that's when she's content. She knows her beauty, she knows she's expressing it the way that God wants her to, in the ways that He's called her to do it. And she knows that He's cherishing her. That God is wrapping the wings of His protection around her and prizing what she has to offer. That's what contentment looks like for a woman versus for men. They're very similar, just slight tweaks, but those can make a real difference. For example, right here when we're looking at the calling, like we were talking before, a woman's not going to see her calling primarily in terms of what she does. When she talks to God about her calling, that's why you talk to them, it's very hard. They're not going to be like, oh, I'm called to do this. What they'll see primarily is who they are in the future and how that affects the church and how that affects God and what they're doing. That's what they're going to see. And eventually there's going to be clarity here in the responsibility of the expression, in the ability of where the beauty comes from, that will give clarity to exactly what that looks like. And how that works in the church and works in the family, works in these different areas. That's where that's going to get figured out. But again, all these things get thrown off if these aren't in focus. For a woman too. These are not new ideas. Like, we might not like to admit these ideas, but look at the world. Are women obsessed with beauty? Yes. Are they obsessed with expressing themselves? Yes. Do they deeply desire to be cherished, even though that's against their philosophy? I don't need a man, but I kind of want to pretend that I need you right now. Hold me and pretend that I don't really need you, but can you just kind of, I don't need you to make money for me, but I want you to pay for this meal. I don't need you to open the door for me, but I'm going to be offended if you don't. I don't need you to do these things, but it would really make me feel more like a woman if you would. It's like the desire of your heart saying that you want this, but you feel guilty to take it because it's what the world says you shouldn't want. And really what's happening there is a bunch of hurt women who've rejected the things they feel have made them vulnerable. And now they're trying to take those principles and apply them to other women that aren't even injured, but saying, this is what you need to do, honey. This is what you need to do to be a strong woman. You'll be taking advantage of this and that. That's not how we handled it in the past. We didn't go to our daughters and say, be like a man so we won't be so scared when you leave the house. We said, no, we're going to make sure that you find the right man to join your life to. We should be searching that for all of our kids, that they would enter into marriages that strengthen them, that they would become complete. They become one flesh with the person that God created for them, that they would build strong and healthy families, that they would have a strong and healthy marriage. That's our best chance for success in the kingdom of God, is that we should be hungry for that. But instead we try to armor them in the world's ways. It's a foolish thing to do. It's foolish. Now, the answer here seems really simple, and it's not. The answer seems to be, this is what I would think first time to this go, okay, I need to ask God who He is. And I'm going to write that down. I'm going to ask God, what's my heart, God? Where's my core? And I'm going to write that down. What's my calling? I'm just going to describe it. I'm going to write that down. I'm going to take that card, I'm going to put it in my Bible, and I'm going to read it regularly to balance my triangle. That will work. It'll work for a minute. Don't get me wrong. We did this a few weeks ago. We went and said, God, refresh my calling. It's gotten distorted. I have a bad vision of my calling. Refresh my calling. And God spoke something, and you wrote it down, and you put it in your notebook or your Bible, and it clarified this line. Now, it wasn't perfect because you probably still screwed up here. You're probably still screwed up here. It wasn't perfect, but it got better for a while. Then what happened? Then it stopped working. You pulled out your little note card and you read it again. And it didn't work. You kept on saying, remember what it was, remember what it was. But something drained out from it. And it stopped working. This happens all the time with all three of these things. You're like, God, who are you? And God will show you who He is, and it's life-changing. And you write it down. And you keep going back the next day and the day after that, and it's like it fades. There's glory on it, but the glory is fading. And then it's just dead. And it's not only dead, looking at it makes you dead. You going there and saying, like God could say, I'm your Father. And it hits you. Like He is my Father. And there's this glory to it, and it changes everything. And then you come back the next day, and you say, you're my Father, and it's there. But it's not as strong. And then you go back the next day, it's weaker, and it fades. And it's the same thing, like you know what God showed you, you know what God said, the words are all there, but the glory fades away. It's like Moses, he came down the mountain with the 10 Commandments, right? He came down with them, and glory was shining off of his face. But it faded. The 10 Commandments are still there, it's still God's will, it's still what He said, but it's just the letter. The Spirit isn't there anymore. That happens with this. That happens with your calling. God shows you your calling, and there's this life in it, there's this Spirit in it, and you grab onto what He said, and you chisel it into a tablet, and you look at it day after day, and then slowly the Spirit disappears from it, the life disappears, and it's just a dead letter. And it deadens you. Even though it's still true. It's like the 10 Commandments. It's not like they suddenly became untrue. It's just they don't give life anymore. Something essential slipped away. That can happen with who God is. That can happen with what your calling is. And it happens with knowing who you are. I guarantee you, you've gone into the presence of God and He's shown His light on your heart, and you knew yourself in a way. And it was incredibly meaningful. It was incredibly healing. And then you went down from the mountain and your face is glowing. I know who I am. And what happens? It fades. Fading. That happens all the time. This is what happens with us all the time. I want to read this verse. Danny pointed out the scripture to me the other day, and God's been speaking to her a lot. But I want you to hear what Paul's saying here. This is 2 Corinthians chapter 3. And this is what Paul says. Are we beginning to commend ourselves to you again? Do we need, like some people, letters of recommendation to you or from you? For I say, you yourselves are our letter of recommendation, written upon our hearts, known and read by all. You show that you are a letter from Christ, the result of our ministry, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of human hearts. So Paul's talking to the Corinthians, and he planted this church, and they're kind of like rejected him. They're distancing themselves from him a little bit. And he says, I don't know why you're treating me like I'm less than. less than a leader, less than someone to go up to. If you really are a church in Christ, it's because I planted this church. You can't discredit me without discrediting yourself. If I led you to Christ, you can't discredit what I'm doing without discrediting yourself. He says, you're acting like I need to bring a letter of recommendation from another church that says, this guy's a good minister. He says, but you are my letter. You're the proof of my ministry. Not ink on a page, but results in your life. God writing His rules on your heart, manifesting in your life. And then He takes this and He opens it up to talk about the old and new covenants, using that same imagery. He says, such confidence we have through Christ before God. Not that we are competent in ourselves to claim that we did anything in ourselves, but our competence comes from God. What he's saying here is, we have these abilities, but they don't come from us. There's a difference between my ability and my heart. My heart is the cup. My ability is what God pours into my cup. It's not mine. It's what God gives me. In the world, a man thinks that his strength comes from himself. In the world, a woman thinks her beauty comes from herself. But what does Paul say? He says, I glory in my weakness, because it's in my weakness where Christ's perfection is perfected, where His glory is perfected. It's where I'm weak, where I'm empty, where I'm a cup that God pours in His strength. It's not my strength until He gives it to me. He's saying, I'm not bragging about the ministry I did. I'm pointing out that God ministered through me to you. I'm confident as a minister because God was able to work through me. You can't dismiss me because God changed your life through what I did. I'm not bragging in myself. I'm saying God was able to do it. He has made us competent as ministers of the new covenant, not of the letter, but of the Spirit, for the letter kills. It literally means the letter deadens, but the Spirit gives life. It says the literal meaning of that is the Spirit revives. The Spirit vivifies what is dead. Now, if the ministry that brought death, he's talking about Moses' laws. He says, if the ministry that brought death, which was graven in letters upon stone, came with glory, so that the Israelites could not look at the face of Moses because of its glory, temporary though it was, will not the ministry of the Spirit be more glorious still? If the ministry that brought condemnation to man was glorious, how much more glorious is the ministry that brings righteousness to men? For what was glorious then now has no glory in comparison with this surpassing glory. And if what was temporary came with glory, how much greater is the glory of that which lasts? Therefore, we have such expectation, and so we are very bold. We're not like Moses, who put a veil over his face to prevent the Israelites from seeing the end of the glory that was fading away. But their minds were made dull. To this very day, the same veil remains when the old covenant is read. It is not removed, because only in Christ can it be taken away. Even to this day, when Moses is read, a veil covers their hearts. But when one turns to the Lord, that veil is taken away. The Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And we all, with unveiled faces, contemplate the Lord's glory and are being transformed into His image from glory to glory, as it comes from the Spirit, from the Lord, who is the Spirit. Let me read one last little bit. Therefore, since through God's mercy we have this ministry, we do not lose heart. Rather, we have renounced the secret and shameful ways. We do not use deception, nor do we distort what God says. On the contrary, by setting forth the truth plainly, we commend ourselves to everyone's conscience in sight of God. If our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing, for the God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers, so they cannot see the light of the good news that displays the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. For what we preach is not ourselves, but Jesus Christ is King, ourselves as your servants for His sake. For God, who said, let light shine out of the darkness, made His light to shine in our hearts, to give us the light of the knowing of God's glory displayed in the face of Christ. This treasure we have in jars of clay, to show that this power is from God and not from us. Can you see how this fits into all that? It's right there on the page for us to begin to put together. What God does is centralized in these revelations, if you will. But this is how revelation works. With Moses, God came and he wanted to reveal himself to the people of Israel. He wanted to show them his strength and his glory and his power. And he wanted to speak his word to them. But he didn't want to speak the word by itself. He wanted the two to come together. He wanted his spirit and his word to be together. He wanted to express himself, but he wanted the power of God in it. But the people wouldn't do that. They said, Moses, you go into the glory of God and you bring back the words for us. This is too much. And that's what he did. He went up and he came down, and he had the glory on him because he had received both at the same time. But they never got it. They just got the dead letter. That's why he says there's a veil. Moses covered himself in modesty. He didn't want them to think he was glorious, so he covered the veil. Covered up his glory. So they never saw God's glory at all. They just got the word. It was like a dead Baptist-y kind of word. And they got it and they handed it to other people. And to this day, they're sitting around reading it, but they never encounter the glory of God. The Spirit doesn't come upon them. It's just the truth in the dead letter. And it's crazy. It's the truth. But because it's just the letter of the truth, it deadens them. It has the opposite effect that it's supposed to have in their life. But look at what happened to Moses. Moses, the same thing happened. It just happened that he got the word and he got the glory at the same time. But what happened when he left the presence of God? The glory faded and it just left the word behind. That's what happens. That's what happens. If you go into the presence of God and say, who are you, Lord? I want to see your face. You cry out in worship, I want to see your face. God will show you his face. You'll see his glory and he'll speak a word, or a word will crystallize in your soul where you're expressing what you're seeing. You'll say, God, you're this. Or he'll say, behold, I'm that. And you'll have something and you'll come down and the glory will be shining on your face and you'll have the tablet, and what? The glory fades over the next few days and all you have is the dead letter. And if that's all you hold on to, what happens? This becomes corrupted. First it becomes dead, then it becomes deadening, mortifying, literally infusing death. And then it becomes corrupt. Then the enemy comes in and starts twisting this thing. What was Moses' answer? He dwelt in the tent of meeting. He met with God all the time. He was pursuing the glory. He says, I want you. I don't want to just take your words and leave and go run these people by your law. You need to go with us. If your glory doesn't go with us, what's the point of having the words? We forget this. We're building up these areas, but we're just stacking letter upon letter, dead word upon dead word, and we're forgetting the fact that the answer is what you know, not what you know about. What happened in the Garden of Eden? There's two trees, right? There was a tree of knowledge, the knowledge of good things and bad things. What's good, what's bad. The knowledge of those things. And the other tree was the tree of life. Tree of what? Eternal life. What does Jesus say eternal life is? To know God. The one true God in Jesus Christ, we say. John 17:3, right? You have one tree that's about knowing God, and one tree that's about the knowledge of good. What is good? Only God. God alone, right? The knowledge of good and evil. There's a distinction. Knowledge is important, don't get me wrong, but it's worthless by itself. The letter is important, but it's worthless without the Spirit. That's why Paul's holding this out. He's saying there's a spirit behind the letter. There is something beyond the truth that is the actual substance of reality. This is just a testimony. But if you'll stand upon it in faith and you will reach beyond it, you will find the Spirit of God there. And He will give you life. And you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. It'll be in that experience of it, though. But what we do is God speaks about who He is, and we take the tablets down the hill, and the glory fades, and we're cool with it. We're like, I still got the truth. That's not the truth. That's the testimony of the truth. And it's only as effective as your faith is. We walk by faith and not by sight. That's what it says later on in this verse. We walk by faith and not by sight. What we want to do is we want to idolatrize these. And the Ten Commandments is what Moses gave to the Israelites about their relationship with Him. You can kind of split it. There's the first 5 and the final 5 commandments. The first 5 commandments really speak to our relationship with God if we understand them correctly. Moses said, meditate on this law day and night. Get behind the letter. Get into the spirit of it and let it feed you. What's the first commandment? Don't have any other gods, right? Why? Because what do? When God shows up and He's invisible, this is the problem with God. There was no idol. There was no image. There was this prophet who was saying, I'll tell you what God's saying. I'll do this and that. That was the problem with it. That's what they struggled with, right? And so God said, this is how we're going to keep these people on track. Because I'm calling them to walk by faith and not sight. They're always going to be trying to get this into the sight place. This is what we're going to do. The first rule is, don't let anybody else sit in my chair. I know you can't see me. You don't see that I'm in my chair. So you might think it's empty and you can put something else there. But that's my chair. Don't start acting like your responsibility is to anyone but me. Don't start acting like anyone else can give you real honor and real fulfillment but me. Don't act like there's any other provider in your life but me. Don't act like there's anyone that to which obedience is owed but me. He's saying, keep that chair empty. I know sometimes it seems like it is empty, like I'm not sitting there, but don't let anybody else sit there. That's what he's saying, first of all. And then he said, secondly, after you follow that rule, you're going to get frustrated because you go, that chair looks empty, God. I know you're saying you're in there, but it looks empty. And you're going to get this idea, well, maybe I should make like a dummy of God and throw it in the chair. And say, okay, God, here's a body for your spirit to enter. Here's something to fill the spot. That's idolatry, right? That's the second commandment. Don't make an image. Don't make an image of me. I know you're going to want to, because it's so much harder to walk by faith than sight. Sight is easy. So you're going to want to grab onto something that's really tangible as you can get away with, and put it in my seat. Don't do it. You know why God says don't do it? Because the second you put an image there, you're going to stop having a relationship with Him and start having a relationship with that image. The idea is that it's going to be like a telephone, right? Like, yeah, I know you're there, and I'm focused on the spirit inside of this idol, but that's not really what's going to happen. You're going to worship the idol. This happens to people all the time. They go into the presence of God, and they experience some powerful emotion. They go, that's how I know God's here. When I have that feeling, when I have that goosebump, when I start getting these really clear insights and boom, 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 revelation, and I'm on a buzz, man, I'm on a Bible high, and the Spirit is open, and they grab onto something that isn't God, it's an effect that God is having, and they put it in God's chair, and they say, I know this isn't you, God, but this is what you do. You fill this thing with your Spirit. You fill the Scripture with your Spirit. You fill my heart and my emotions with your Spirit. You fill my thoughts. And I'm going to take that. This doctrine is about you. We stick it in that chair. But the moment we put something in that chair and say, that's how I know God's here, that's the moment we start worshiping that thing instead of God. Why did God say, don't worship me through an idol? Number one is because we were going to focus on the idol, and we won't even care whether His Spirit's there or not. People who worship idols don't go, let's make sure the spirit of the demon is in the idol, right? They don't care whether it's there or not. They just worship the stone. That's what they do. Sometimes the demon's in there, sometimes it's not. They don't really pay attention, because the focal point is the focal point, right? The moment we make an idol of God, it's not about whether He's there anymore. It's about whether the focal point is there. The second reason is because we're focused on the physical thing, if something supernatural happens, we don't care where it came from. You get that emotional feeling, you're not really looking behind it to figure out, is this from God? Is this from me? Is it from a demon? You don't care anymore. Because you focused on this external thing. There is idolatry where we intentionally build the idol. But there's also idolatry where God uses something and we decide to turn what He handed us into an idol. Remember with Moses, he put the snake up on the staff, and it was a symbol that God was using to teach people about salvation. Here's a snake on a stick. This is sin crucified, and they were been bitten by snakes, and they were healed by that snake on the stick thing. What did they do with it? They took it and they began to bow down and worship it. You know how often we do that? All the time. All the time we do it. God speaks a word to you. He comes to you in your mind. You can see it like a word from the Lord. He comes to you and He gives you a hug. And the next time you go into prayer, you visualize that to try to connect with Him. Why? Because it's easier than just saying, God, I know I can't feel you or sense you, but I trust you're here. It's a faith thing, not an imagination thing, not an image thing, not stirring up an emotion with the song, let's go, Jesus, Jesus, and trying to stir something up, because it's easier to have an emotional focal point than to say, I don't feel a damn thing, but I trust you're here. Because it's faith, not sight. That's where you're going to meet God. You're not going to meet God anywhere else but there. You taking Him at His word, that's where you're going to meet God. And that's what God was telling to the Israelites. You start making these images, and you're not going to care whether I'm here or not, and you're not going to care if anybody else shows up. As long as they're wearing the right Yahweh mask, you're going to think it's me. That's what gets screwed up here all the time with the Creator. We take God's seat and we put a whole bunch of other things in there because it's easier to have a relationship with them in that seat than it is to have with the invisible God in that seat. And if we don't do that, then we're going to stick an idol there and say, this golden calf is Yahweh who brought me up out of Israel. And it might be emotion, it might be thought, it might be doctrinanity. I'm grabbing onto some idea, but we're going to stick it in there. It's this feeling I have and this peace in my heart. And it's not that God doesn't do that. It's not that He doesn't bring the chills. It's not that He doesn't make your heart feel good. It's not that there is a sense of peace. But those things are not for you to take and beat the gold into an image and put it in His chair. That's not what you're supposed to be seeking Him. That's not how it's supposed to go. It's supposed to be by faith. And what happens is when you stand on the testimony of God, and it's a dead letter, but you stand on it and you reach past it in faith, you say, I know you're in this room with me. I know you're in this room with me. And you push through by faith, all of a sudden the Spirit shows up and He brings life with Him. And the letter that was dead 2 seconds ago, all of a sudden it gets all the life that it had before. That's why when Moses gave them those commandments, he said, don't just follow these dead letters. I want you to meditate on these things. I want you to reach past them and find God in the midst of this word, because if you study the scriptures by themselves, you'll be dead. What did Jesus say to the Sadducees? He said, you search the scriptures because you think you're going to find life in the words. He said, but they point to me. He says, if you're not using this to reach out in the Spirit and say, Jesus, I want to know you, I want to be in your presence, then it doesn't mean anything. This isn't the knowledge of God. You can stack all the knowledge of God you want up here, it's not going to work. This is knowing God. That's His presence. But what do we do with His presence? We take the thing that's most tangible, the thing that's most visible to the eye, and we make it into an idol. What's God's presence mean to you? People talk about it all the time. I was reading a book the other day, back in the day, Tommy Tenney, God Chasers. And I'm reading it, and I'm like, man, this guy's like it was really moving to me when I was a young Christian, because he's talking about the only thing that matters is God's presence. He's completely right. But when he's talking about God's presence, it's like tingles. It's like the pulpit cracked in half, and people fell out weeping in the Spirit, and it's like, that's what God's presence does. Don't get me wrong, that happens. But God is not in the fire. He's not in the earthquake. That's not what you're supposed to be chasing. And if you're focused on that, if you put an idol in that chair, it's just a matter of time before a demon walks in. And long before that, God will stop showing up. He'll say, you're not really here for me, you're here for that. You don't care whether I'm in the seat or not. You care whether that emotion is in the seat or not. You don't care whether I'm here or not. You care whether there's tingles or whether there's crazy read my mail words or whatever else it is. You don't really care about my presence. You care about some side effect of my presence. And part of that is just we struggle with the Spirit so much. Like when we're in the Spirit, when it's giving us life, it's awesome. The glory, it's great. But the moment we get back into the world and that fades a little bit, it's the last thing it just doesn't seem like it'll work. We'll grab on to anything else. And that's why God puts those rules there. He says, don't do it. That's not a way you can go. Don't put an image on me. What's the third commandment? Do not use my name in vain. You know what God gave his people instead of an image? He gave them a name. And people think, oh, it's an invocation. You'll read about that all the time when we say it. It's an invocation where we say Yahweh to bring his presence down. Bring the heavens down. Open heaven. This is what we're trying to do. That is not what the name is for. We know that because what's the commandment? Don't use my name in vain. Do you know what that means? It doesn't mean that you cursed. It doesn't mean you said, oh, Jesus, and it was like an angry word or something like that. That's not what it means. What it means is he says, don't ever speak my name without remembering I'm right here in the room hearing you say it. He gave us a name so you could talk to him. So when you come into a cold room and you go, man, it would be so nice to have an idol over here to focus and talk to, he says, you don't need that. Just speak to me on a first name basis. Exercise your faith in prayer. Worship me. Speak to me. Say the name, but don't say it in vanity. Say it in reverence to the fact that I'm with you. Make it an act of faith. And eventually, faith will be overcome by the Spirit. And what you believe by faith alone will suddenly be confirmed by the power and the life of my Spirit in this place. What's the fourth commandment? Keep the Sabbath, right? What does that mean? What the Sabbath means is that what God did, he created everything, and then he created us. It was that whistle blew at the end of the last day of creation. God created humanity. The first day that Adam and Eve lived on the earth was a Sabbath day where they walked around and recognized and worshiped God for all the things he had already done. The first day of work came right after that. What happens when you spend a day looking at a garden that's already done, and then the next day you get to work on it? I'll tell you, you don't reinvent the wheel. You don't start all over again from the beginning. You join with the work that's already done. What did Jesus say? Did Jesus say, well, I wake up in the morning and I reach inside myself and I figure out what I'm supposed to do? He goes, no. I look out and I see what my Father is already doing and I get involved. That's what the Sabbath rest is. The Sabbath rest is when we realize that God's already on it and he's leaving a part undone for us to fit into. You know what happens when you come into the presence of God? And even coming into the presence of God, like I'm going to do a devotion. You go into it and you say, I'm not going to fill this with anything but God's presence. I'm not going to fill anything up. I'm not going to put the Bible in his chair. I'm not going to put theology in his chair. I'm not going to put emotional music and experiences in his chair. I want him, and I'm leaving his chair because I know he's there whether I see him or not. And that's going to be the focal point, him, even though he's invisible. And when you refuse any image, all the things that say grab on and focus on this and say, no, I'm just going to, in faith, I'm going to speak to him as though he were in the room with me. I'm going to reach out and interact with him by faith. That gets you almost there, but this is the most important part. You can't act like this is your thing, like you're building it. You have to walk into this thing and realize long before I came up with this idea of praying, God knew it was going to happen. Preparing it. He was preparing this moment to meet me. He was preparing, saying, I know on Tuesday, Danny's not going to get into prayer first, but he's going to get frustrated. Right after he stops at Taco Bell to get a Cruncherito, he's gonna have a moment and say, I need to connect with Jesus, and he's gonna step into my presence, and he's gonna think that that was his idea. He's gonna think that he has to bring everything because it's an unscheduled prayer. What he doesn't know is I've scheduled this time, and I've said it's been in my schedule book since before I created the universe. I've been preparing for this. He took 2 seconds to prepare. I've been preparing for an amount of time that you couldn't even visualize. What you need to realize is there's a place for you. It's already prepared. You think you're going to come and set the table in prayer. God's had that table set before he created the earth. What he wants you to do is not tear it down and try to rebuild something in your flesh, but to join in faith what he's already set up. To know that he's already cooked the meal. You just need to let him point you to the seat you're supposed to be sitting in. That's not about you praying. It's about him leading you in the Spirit in what you pray and what you do. And to have a heart that says, I not only know you're here, I know you got this. And I know all I need to do is jump in the yoke with you and follow where you lead. Those are 4 rules. And Jesus gave them to say, look, this is how we're going to keep you knowing God instead of getting lost in the knowledge of God. That ultimately is a dead letter if you lose my presence. What's the name of God? It's meaningless if it's just a word. They say all that Yahweh, Yahweh, Yahweh. That's why don't do it in vain, right? But if you stand in faith and you say, Yahweh, I'm speaking to you because I know you're right here in front of me. And reverence begins to cover your heart. And the Spirit begins to draw near. Everything changes. To take the revelation of God, something he's spoken to you, and you just say, okay, this is what God said, and you're literally just treating it like it's something like someone handed you a note. Instead of saying, the only thing that made this powerful is that God spoke it in his own voice to me. This is me writing it down afterwards. It's worthless unless he speaks it to me again. It's worthless until I step into the Spirit and his Spirit is bringing that truth to bear. It's shining that truth in my heart. It doesn't matter if I don't have that. What does it say in this verse? It says this, for God who said, let light shine from the darkness, he made his light shine in our hearts to give us the light of the knowing of God's glory displayed in the face of Christ. That's what he says. The veil's not taken away until we turn to Christ. He's not talking about until you get baptized, you say a sinner's prayer. He's saying it's not until you turn to Christ. You let go of all the other crap and you say, Jesus, I know you're in this room and all I want is you and I'm not going to let go. And it's in the midst of that moment when you stretch beyond the letter. You're not satisfied with the letter. I don't want a dead letter that's just going to leave me more dead than when I found it. I want you to breathe your Spirit of life into this place. Bring this word alive. Bring me alive. Bring everything alive. You are life. And when you do that, you walk away and there's glory on it. It's in your heart. That's why he says we carry this treasure in jars of clay. This is what we're here to do, to carry this power within us. And the more crushed we are, the more it seeps out. The more the death of Christ be worked in the outer man, the more it seeps out from the inner man. That's what we're here to do. When this gets in balance, all of a sudden these lines start straightening out. And you know what happens? This is the other verse. Look at this. It says, and we all, who with unveiled faces, this is the vulnerability. We're getting naked before God. With unveiled faces, we contemplate the Lord's glory. That's knowing him. Not collecting knowledge, that's knowing him. We contemplate the Lord's glory. We are being transformed into his image with ever increasing glory. That is glory by glory. What he's saying is, as we push past the layers of the onion, God shows up in his Spirit. We're seeking him in faith and he shows up, and we don't pounce on, I'm feeling something. We push past that and say that he's not in that. It's like Elijah. He's not in the tingle I'm feeling in my body. I want you. And then the emotion rises up. That's a nice emotion, God, but I didn't come here for the emotion. I came for you. And a thought comes up. It's brilliant. That's a nice thought, God. Maybe we can look at that later, but I didn't come here for nice thoughts. I came for you. And as we push past the onion layers and we go deeper and deeper, what do we behold? The glory of God. But you know what happens when we stand in the glory of God? We're transformed into His image. We walk away knowing who we really are. Because when we come into the glory of God, that false identity, it just is exposed. And our heart, like that's the cost of getting into God's presence, is you're going to have to be real. You're going to have to get naked. You're going to have to lift up your heart and say, is it good enough for you? It's all I really have. And God will shine a light and reveal who you are. But it's the same thing. If you walk away, you don't need to have knowledge of yourself. You need to know yourself. The same 10 commandments that we were talking about earlier, the same thing follows down here. We do it all the time. We take the responsibilities that should be our heart, and we say, I don't know my heart. I don't want to leave the charity, so I'll give its job to something else. I'll give it to my mind. I'll give it to, I'm a strong guy. I'm a hard worker. That's what I'm going to put right where my heart belongs. I'll put that on the throne. When the throne of your being is your heart. And who's supposed to be enthroned in your heart? Jesus. That's how it's supposed to be worked. Both on the throne. We don't do that. We throw everything we can think of in that chair because we don't want our heart to do that. Because guess what? If your heart's on the throne, that's what people are going to see. Not the persona, not the mask. If you're walking around with your heart out, that's what they're going to shoot at. And that's what you don't want to happen. So you want to put something else in that chair. And if you actually face into it and you go, no, I'm going to put my heart in that chair, guess what you're going to do? You're going to break the second commandment. You're going to try to put an image, a metaphor for your heart in that chair. Be like, the last time I looked inside myself and God showed me, I saw this idea where He said, you are the protector of the vision. And we're going to grab onto that word after it's milked out all of its glory and it's got nothing left. And we're going to keep throwing it in that chair, and it's going to be a dead, idolatrous word that doesn't have anything in it. It's not the image of God. If it is the image of God, it's an insult to Him. It's a golden calf. It's not what we're supposed to be. How does that change? It only changes when we know ourselves. It's the same thing. To know your heart is a deep thing. It's not something where I figured it out and I wrote it down on a piece of paper and it's this easy to know who I am. I just hold up the paper. Oh, yeah, that's who I am. Now, that prophet to the nations, and we just know the job description. That's not how it works. What does it say in Proverbs? It says the heart is a deep well, and the man of wisdom takes time to draw it up. You can't know yourself in some cheap way. It's like trying to know your wife on a budget. You got to get into somebody's heart, to be close to someone, to know anyone else's heart. Whether it's a friend, whether it's your wife, whether it's your kid, you got to invest a lot of time to figure out who someone is, find out what their heart is about. You need to invest as much time to figure out who you are. And you know what it's about? It's that same thing. It's saying, I know you're already here. I know you're silent. I know you're invisible. You've probably been beaten into a place where you're not going to make a peep. I've buried you for so long, and I've hid from you for so long, and I've punished you for speaking for so long, that my heart is probably mummified. But heart, I know you're here. I'm not going to let anything else take your place. I'm not going to throw some cheap thing that you did at some point and pretend, oh, this is it. This is the emotion. This is the thought. This is the dream. This is the idea. No, it's your own presence we're talking about. You have to have reverence to enter into the presence of God. You have to say, you're you. I'm not going to modify that. I'm not going to imagine anything. I'm going to let you be you, and I'm going to let the weight of that hit me. That's what glory is. It's the weight of God's presence, the kaibod, the weight. And saying, God, I'm going to let you be who you are. And I'm going to let that hit me. Knowing yourself is the same way. You turn to your heart and you say, I'm going to let you be who you are. And I'm going to let the weight of that hit me. And I'm going to make the adjustments. My soul needs to adjust to expressing who you are. My whole life I've buried you. My whole life I've villainized you and treated you like you were a bad thing. Because you were heartbroken over your sin. and because you wanted God and you weren't satisfied with the things of this life, and you were hungry for acceptance, and maybe you tried to get it from people and they said you were too clingy and they slapped you down, or they did this or they did that, and it's because you were hungry for God but you didn't even know what you were hungry for. And what did you do? You punished your heart and you rejected who you were and you built somebody else. And it doesn't stop until you burn the idol. It doesn't stop until you destroy the golden calf and say, that was never who I was. That's an invention to please sinful people. It doesn't honor me. It doesn't honor God. It's not who I am. And it's not until you get quiet before your heart and you say, be who you are. Be who you are. I'm not going to punish you for being who you are. Stand up and be who you are. Let the weight of your own presence fall upon you. Because half the time it's what God is doing in worship. We're just so blind to it. He comes in, we're trying to focus on Him, and He's pointing at us. What do you think He's trying to do? He's trying to introduce you to who you really are. He's trying to say, are you done pretending to be a British dude? Are you ready to be who you really are? Are you done pretending to be a gangster? Are you ready to be who you really are? Are you done pretending to be a clown and you sell yourself cheap? You whore yourself out for a laugh. Are you ready to be who you are? Are you ready to stop pretending to be this guy and this person and that person? To be cool, to be whatever. Are you ready to be who you are? Because that's all I've ever wanted you to be. That's the cup that I pour myself into, and I reveal myself to the world in a way no one else can reveal me. I'm ready for you to be that guy. That doesn't happen because we gather knowledge or words about ourselves. That's because we spend time in the presence of our own heart. Where we're not crapping on it, where we're not rejecting it, where we're not bearing it, where we're not yelling at it and telling it what a piece of crap it is. It's when we stand in the presence of God, in our own presence, before the presence of God, and say, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. That in my inner man there is something that God desires so greatly that He would send His Son to die on a cross to preserve it. It's important. And it's not something that we can get away from. What God showed me when He was talking about the Creator, He took me through the 10 Commandments. The first 4 are kind of obvious. We talked about those. Then He said the 5th commandment's about me too. And I go, what? Honor your father and mother that you can live long in the land. He goes, who's your mother and father in the New Testament? I started thinking, well, Jesus' father was God. And when they said, who is your mother and your brother and your sisters, He said, those who obey God. Who is the parent? It's God. That's the idea. Honor your source, that you may stay long in the land, stay long in the blessing. I felt like God was saying, like, when you start connecting with my image, when you start coming into that place and the Spirit makes you alive, what you're going to do is you're going to look at how alive you are, and you're going to start bragging about that to yourself, to anybody else who will listen. I'm alive! God's using me! You're just going to blow up on it, and you're going to be a crazy person. And He says, don't do that. Don't honor yourself. I understand that you're alive. I understand you're bearing fruit. But what I want you to honor is I want you to honor your source. I don't want you to forget where it came from. Don't go into the promised land and receive all my blessings and say, look at all that I have. Don't do that. Say, look at all that God has given. Honor me in it, not yourself. And He pointed that out. And then He went through the rest of the 10 Commandments. The final 5 of the commandments we usually think are for people. That's our main focus on them. But He was holding them up to Himself. He held up... I have all written down. I usually can remember them off the top of my mind to make sure I get this right. He lifted up, do not murder. What's murder in the New Testament? It's anger, right? What did God say? He said, don't get angry at me. He says, I know you will get angry with me. But I'll tell you what Paul said. In your anger against God, do not sin. In your anger against God, don't let it remain. Don't go to sleep on it. Don't let it fester. He says there's things that I'm going to do that you're not going to like, and you're going to find yourself flashing in anger, but anger does not support the righteous life that I planned for you. Set that in your heart as a standard. You want to grow in intimacy with me? You want to really know who I am? You can't allow anger to fester in your heart towards me. You can't allow it to trigger you to sabotage what we have, to step out and sin against me. You got to catch that anger and say, I'm wrong. I'm not going to act on this, and I'm going to resolve it. I'm not going to let it sit here until eventually it tricks me into doing something against God. I got to deal with my anger. Then he pointed out adultery is the next one. Don't commit adultery, which I was like, what does that mean? But then I really felt like God was pointing to adultery. He said, you know what adultery really is? And I'm like, yeah, you cheat on them. You have sex with someone you're not supposed to have sex with. You're cheating on them, which is like the false God thing. If I thought about it with God, this is repetitious or something. But what God did is he pointed out and he says, no, what happens in marriage is I set something apart. And that makes it capable for intimacy. So you go to your wife and you say, I won't have sex with anyone but you. And that makes it safe for her to have sex with you. And she can have the intimacy with you because you're not going to betray her and have that intimacy with someone else. And intimacy is full of that. If you want to come and get closer to God, he's going to say, well, I want you to do this. Or I want you to never do that. Don't cut your hair, Samson. Don't get drunk on wine. Don't even drink wine. There's going to be things he's going to talk about. There's going to be things he points to. They're going to be keys to intimacy. He's like, I'll take you into the deep place, but you can't tell anyone else about it. I don't want you to go. I don't want you to sleep with me and then go tell your friends what it was like. You can do that with other things. We did that in the past. I want you to testify about how great I am. But if I'm going to take you to this level of intimacy, you need to know that everything that goes on at this level is for you alone. Don't you dare parade. Don't trick me into getting naked in front of you and then take pictures to show to your friends. That's not for you to brag about. What are you here for me because you want me, or are you here to build your ego with the boys in the locker room and show off how spiritual you are? And God will set standards. He will set things and say, you want intimacy with me? Let's talk about the covenant. Let's talk about how we protect each other, how you protect my glory. If I'm going to show it to you, we need to protect it. We need to have rules. There needs to be vulnerability. And you know what we do? God will say, I'll take you to a deeper level. Just carry this cross. And we'll carry the cross until we get what we want out of it. And then we drop the cross. And well, I'm not getting any more glory out of this. Like, that's the relationship. Like, I'll say I love you until I get you out of your pants. And then I don't want to spend time with you anymore. Because what's in it for me? I already got what I wanted. Then you got what you want. You didn't want him ever. You didn't want that girl in high school. That wasn't. You wanted sex. That's what you wanted. You wanted your orgasm. You didn't care about her. And we do the same kinds of things with God. Where we're like, I'm ready to bear a cross with you. Just show me your face. This is what I want. I'll do anything for you. And we'll carry the cross when we're starving for God. But the second he feeds us and we get some satisfaction, we'll go, well, I'm done with this cross. I'll give up this TV show for you, God. Just show me your face. He shows you your face, and you go, 2 days later, you go, well, what am I getting for not watching the TV show now? I already got that. I guess I'll go back to watching that show again. In the tabernacle, they had two kinds of sacrifices. One for sin, right? One was a sin offering. One was a guilt offering. That's not the original Hebrew names. This is what we named them. The sin offering was you sinned against God. The guilt offering was you sinned against holiness, which is a hard idea for us to understand. But what the idea is, you made a covenant with God and you broke it. You promised him that you wouldn't do that, and then you went back and you did it. And it was foundational for the intimacy you were asking for. He said, I'll do this for you if you will do this for me. We're building intimacy here. And then you lied and you broke the covenant with him. That's adultery. It's not really that you had sex with somebody else. How many people we got married and we had sex with somebody else before we got married? That's painful knowledge for your wife to have in your head, but it's not going to ruin your marriage. Maybe she thought you were a virgin. Later on you go, well, actually I wasn't. I never told you, but I wasn't. That would be hurtful knowledge, but it's different than saying I did it yesterday with somebody else. Why? Because you promised you wouldn't do that so we could have this. You stole this. It wasn't for you to have without these conditions. You baited and you switched and you lied and you deceived and you took what didn't belong to you and you made it cheap. Those are all the problems we have with adultery. And when you start knowing God, He's going to tell you things like that. You're going to make a covenant with Him and you're going to break those things and you go, oopsie, I sinned. It's like every other sin. It's not. And you'll know it because you'll go to God and you'll say sorry and you'll say I forgive you, but you'll still feel that rock in your relationship. Just like you could say, babe, will you forgive me? I stepped out on you, I cheated on you, and she'll say, of course I forgive you, but the marriage is still broken. Because you have to go back and you have to remake the covenant you broke. You have to look into her eyes and convince her that you really mean it, that you're not going to do it again. You're the only one for me. I will not do this again. I know I already promised this and I broke it, but I'm reinstituting this. And then even after that, this is where you get reparations in the old covenant. Because when you broke a promise to God, they say, well, you need to reaffirm that promise. You need to fulfill that promise. And then you need to throw more on top of it. You need to invest in that relationship over and above. You can't just go to God and say, sorry about watching that show. I promised not to watch. Oopsie. And the blood sprinkles on you and you're done. No, you have to go and remake that covenant. It might take you twice as long as it took the first time. And then you need to linger there and just invest. You need to prove to God. You need to show Him how much the intimacy means. These are not little oopsie mistakes. There's a reason why in Scripture it says, do not be fast to make a vow before your God. In the New Testament, we're told not to make a vow to other people. Right? Don't invoke God's name to make a vow to somebody else. And we're not supposed to come up with our own vows. But they're still up, like in marriage, there's still vows, right? Those are God-given vows that He wants us to take. And there are God-given vows He wants us to take in our own relationship as we're pursuing Him. And it's the same kind of brokenness when we break them. That's why Scripture says be careful. Don't be flippy and say, of course, I want to see your face, I'll give everything for it. You need to be willing to give everything for it. You need to count the cost before you make the promise. Because it's gonna be a lot more serious than just some oopsie sin if you break that. He showed me, don't steal. Don't steal from God. Don't take the things I gave you. Because I didn't really give them to you. I made you steward over these things. Don't you steal them away into a corner to enjoy them by yourself, to spend them how you want to use them, use them the way you want to use them. That's not what I gave you it for. Can you imagine if someone's like, watch my house, and you're like, you locked them out of the house so they couldn't visit while you demoed the inside and did whatever you wanted to it without talking to them? That's what we do with God all the time. We go, thanks for the marriage, God, locking you out. I'm going to redesign this thing the way I want it to be. That's stealing from God. We steal time from God. We steal things that He has given us, and we can honor Him with those things. We can give Him the first fruits and invite Him to abide with us in those things, but we steal them. Don't bear false witness. That is, don't accuse. You know what a false witness is? A false witness is when you say, I saw it, but you didn't see it. That's what it means. In the old covenant, to be a false witness was to say, I'm an eyewitness to this man's sin, but you didn't actually see it. You might have sinned, you might absolutely believe to the depths of your being that he sinned, but you're saying, I know it's true, and you don't know it's true. That's all you have to do to be a false witness, is to act like you know something when you don't actually know. You think it's probably true. I'm so sure, I would bet my house that it's true, but you didn't actually see it, you don't actually know it. To be a false witness to God is to act like you know something about Him that He hasn't shown you and you don't really know it. It doesn't always mean that it's an accusation. You're a horrible God and you hate me. A lot of times it's just a cold thing. We wouldn't even think of it. Like, well, God doesn't care about that. Well, if I do that, I'm going to reap it, man. I can't expect God's mercy in that. What we really mean is He's not going to be merciful. There's a whole bunch of times when we do this, we would say, don't be angry with God. We think that covers everything. But there are a lot of cold-blooded accusations. There's a cold-blooded accusation that the man with the parable of the talents said when he said, you are a hard man. I know you are. I know you're a hard man. You reap where you have not sown, and you gather where you're scattering no seed. He didn't even think of that as an accusation. He's like, that's just a fact. Everybody knows that. There's things you think you know about God, but if you really look at it, you're like, I don't know how I know that. I don't know that that's true at all. He's never told you that. That'll kill your knowing of God too. Thinking you know things when you don't actually. Get in the way of knowing Him every time. The last one is what? Is don't covet. What do we think coveting is about? People think it's like, I want stuff that I don't have. Coveting is really the sin of thinking, I could run the world better than God. Clearly, I deserve that, not this guy. Clearly, that should be mine. He doesn't deserve it. It's actually sitting in judgment of God's plan for your life. That's what coveting really is, when you really get to the bottom of it. It's sitting there and saying, this isn't the way it should be. You're wrong, God. You're wrong with how you did this. That's the ultimate evil sin of coveting, is you're sitting there and saying, you did it wrong, God. What I'm doing, I know my job, but all the rest of it that's in your control, you're screwing it up. You don't judge. This is it. Like you get into the presence of God, you know God, you walk out, the glory is on your face, and then you see someone getting blessed over there, you sit in judgment and go, that's not the right choice, God. And then all of a sudden you go, where did God go? I can't see His face anymore. That's what happened. Coveting it's so natural to compare, and it's so natural to have your own judgment. It's so quick for that to pop up. But it'll separate you from God every time. And God showed me these things, and He said the same thing's true. Those 10 commandments are just as true if you apply them to knowing your own heart. Don't put something else in the seat that I gave your heart. Keep that seat empty, and realize your heart's in that seat. You may have rejected it for so long, you don't even know what your presence feels like anymore. You don't know your own presence. You think you're it, but you're just the soul expressing itself. You don't know where your core is anymore. It's there right next to you, and you don't know that it's there. Say, first step to finding yourself is to get the false stuff out of your chair and know your heart sitting there, whether you can feel it or not. The second step is stop trying to grab onto some external thing and say, that's my heart. Your presence is your presence. It's just like God's presence. It doesn't need fireworks, and it doesn't usually have them. And the moment you grab onto some firework or some tingle that comes with your presence, that's the moment you're chasing the tingle, and you're not trying to find your own heart anymore. You need to center on your heart, not on some side effect of your heart. Same thing's true with the name. Like, all you really need to do to connect with your heart, speak to your heart. All you got to do is talk to yourself. That's all you got to do to find your heart. Just speak and mean it. Talk to the core of who you are. Just turn to yourself right there and speak to your, like Paul, like David used to say. He would speak to his own soul, right? He would talk right to himself. But the problem is we often do it in vain. We're talking to ourselves. We're not listening. We're not acting like our heart's really there. We're just throwing around accusations. We're not sitting there trying to figure out what we really think or how we really feel. We're not asking. We're not listening. We're not abiding. What about the Sabbath thing? How does the Sabbath thing work? Here's how the Sabbath thing works. God built your heart. It's done. He redeemed your heart. It is accomplished. It is finished. You know what that means? You don't need to work on it. You need to join in with your part. God has given you a cup, and He's like, let me fill the cup and then pour it out to these people. And you look at the cup and you go, this isn't a good cup. I need to fix this cup. What did they not do on the first day in Eden? They sat down and they recognized what God had already done in the garden. Then, on the next day, they said, God, what do you want to add to it? That's exactly what we're supposed to do with our hearts. We're supposed to recognize that we're fearfully and wonderfully made. We need to realize that there's something worth dying for in the center of us. I'm not talking about your sin. I'm not talking about your outer man. I'm talking about the core of your identity. If it was bad, he wouldn't have died to save it. It would be a wash. Forget about it. It was good. That's why he died to redeem it. And the problem is we're always trying to build it from scratch. That's how we don't keep the Sabbath. We go, well, I'm building a mask. I'm going to get the right personality. I'm going to become the right person. And God's saying, you don't need to become anybody. You already are who you're supposed to be. You just need to stop rejecting that person and bring him into my presence. That's what you need to do. You need to stop rejecting your heart and let me sit on the throne of it instead. You're so busy rejecting God's throne that he has no place in you. You need to bring your heart back. You need to put it before God. That's what you need to do. And that comes from the Sabbath. That's where David came from. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. What does that mean? He's in his own presence. He's letting God draw the water up from the well of his heart and show him who he really is. And he's in shock that, like every other part of creation, God did a good job making him too. He sits in his presence. He's not only comfortable in it, he's shocked by how awesome it is. Look at how I'm made. This is what's going to happen. When you figure this out and this starts becoming clear, and you see your abilities hitting this, going all the way up and honoring the Creator, it's what happens with Paul. Do you ever have times where you think, man, Paul seems almost prideful. He starts talking about, look at what God has used me, how powerfully God is using me. Look at what he's doing. And he's what? I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Look at the bad mother that God created me to be to do this job. Look at how good I am built to do this. Nobody else could take the power of God and make this color. Look at this color, man. Look at what God is that nobody would have saw. It boils up inside of you. At the same time, he says, I'm the chief of sinners. Like there's nothing good that's in me that is in myself. He says, but man, when I own the cup that God made me, and I hold it up and I let God fill it up, look at the power of this thing, man. Look how awesome this is. Fifth commandment, honor your source. Why? Because you'll get full of yourself real quick. That's part of it. That's why David said, look at how fearfully and wonderfully made I am. He put the focus on, look at what God has done. Not look at me, but look at what God is doing in me. Even in Corinthians, when he's saying, look at what God has done through us in building this, his focus is still on God. Honor the source. But then all of these other commandments are there as well. These are some of the ones that hit me. Don't be angry with yourself. Anger does not bring the righteous life that God wants you to have. There's never a time when God's going to be okay with you being angry with yourself. He knows it's going to happen. It's not a sin when you get angry with yourself. It's a temptation to sin. It's like when lust comes knocking on your door. It's not sin until you act on it. And that's what God says. He says, I know you're going to get angry with yourself, Andy. Don't you sin against me by getting angry with yourself. Don't you dare sin against your heart. Don't you sin against what I gave you because you're upset with yourself or you're disappointed with yourself. And don't go to bed holding that anger in your heart against yourself and let it stew for a week until you make a mistake. You need to come to me and get it right. Get the anger out. It's wrong. Think about how many times. Have you ever been in God's presence and genuinely felt his anger at you? Not at something you did, but at you. And think about the way you talk to your heart. Think about the way you talk to yourself probably every day. I can't, freaking idiot. Why are you think about how you talk to yourself and think about if you talk to anybody else in your life. Will God be cool with you talking to him like that? I don't care what enemy of the kingdom you're imagining in your head. Would he be okay with you using that disgusting, abusive, violent language towards anyone, but you use it on yourself? Constantly. You don't think that that has an effect in knowing who you are? You don't think your heart's beaten to a bloody pulp in the corner and it won't even meet at you anymore? It doesn't say anything anymore. It knows you don't want it. You can't rebuild a knowledge of yourself. You can't know yourself as you really are and beat yourself up all the time. It's not what God wants you to do. It's not your job. You know why? Because God says it's my job to chastise you. It's my job to discipline you. I'm your father. You're my son. That's my job. You know what I'd do if I came in a room and my kid was beating themselves? And they said, I'm a bad kid, and they just started hitting myself. I'd be like, that's not your job. It's not your job to judge. It's not your job to punish. You need to leave that in my hands. If you love me and if you trust me, you won't do that. And I would tell my kid, I understand you get frustrated with yourself. I understand you get angry at times. But don't you dare act on it. You stop right there. You come to me if you can't figure out how to deal with anger. We'll get the frustration out. But don't you dare be violent with yourself. Don't you dare speak against yourself. Don't crap all over. You're my kid. You can't speak against yourself without dragging me down with you. Don't you dare disrespect yourself. There's a lot of us, we've somehow convinced ourselves that taking a crap on our heart is humility, and it's not. It's disgusting, and it hurts God, and it screws you up, and it's what Satan has been trying to get you to do your whole life. He's like, I'm tired of being an accuser of the brethren. You want to just sit around and accuse yourself? And you go, sure. Sounds like a great idea. Don't be angry with yourself. You are, but don't sin. Don't sin in your anger. Don't speak ugly, violent words against yourself. Don't beat yourself up. You know, a lot of times, the reason a person reaches for the bottle, or they reach for the drugs, or they reach for the porn, or they reach for whatever, you know what they're doing? They're breaking their diet. You know what they're doing? They're punishing themselves. Saying, you suck so much it doesn't even matter. You're such a freaking loser, just go ahead and eat it. Just go ahead and take that drink. And it's a way of despising themselves. It's an act of if you don't have a guard set up against that, I guarantee it's all over you. Satan doesn't let that kind of ground not matter. Same thing's true. Don't violate the covenant of intimacy with yourself. You want to get to know your heart. It doesn't matter whether you're 2 years old or 42 years old. It's going to take work to know who you are, and you need to make your heart feel safe to do it. Your spirit has secrets. It's like a well that you plumb to get. You have to get intimate with yourself. You need to learn who you are. And it's going to take that same kind of thing. It's not you like, heart, what do you need? God's going to be like, to figure out the next thing about you, you're going to need to do this to make yourself feel safe. Your heart's not going to open up to this unless you follow these rules. And it's going to be things like, stop laughing when people make jokes about you. It's not funny. And it hurts you. And it slaps your heart in the face, and you're never going to figure out who you are if you keep on crapping all over yourself like that. There's a bunch of little things, little intimacy rules where it's like, you can't go and hang out with that guy. You know how he treats you. You gotta have to make a stand and completely redefine that relationship, or just say, no, I'm not going to hang out with you anymore. Because to do that is an offense against the relationship that God is building with you in yourself to know who you are. Go and hang out with somebody and you have to fit into the mold of who they want you to be, that's an offense against your heart. Can you imagine you go into the quiet place and God opens up your heart and you say, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. And then you walk out and you go and someone treats you like crap and you go, yeah, sure, why not? Or you make fun of yourself to that person. You insult yourself to get a laugh out of them. You're trading your self-respect for approval from them. I don't care if you like me hard. I want them to like me. What do we call it? We call it sabotage. You're sabotaging yourself. You're betraying your own heart. You need to start saying, God, how do I betray my own heart? I know I'm doing it. How? What are the ways that I just take my inner child and slap him in the face and tell him that he's dirty and stupid and that he needs to hide because I'm trying to build someone better than who God made me to be? We take on the worst aspects of the people who abuse us. That's what's so hard. Sometimes the reason you can't forgive your father is because you're still being him to yourself. You're just not owning that you're the one causing the pain. He's been out of your life for a long time. You barely talk to him, but you still are him when you talk to yourself. And that wound's still open and fresh and screaming because you still are beating yourself up the way he used to beat you up. You're just filling the hole for him. The ugly words he said, you're still saying. The accusations he made, you're still making. You can't forgive him because he's still abusing you, except he's not really doing it. You are. He can't stop because he stopped years ago. It's you doing it now. And you'll never feel right, and it'll never be over until you stop doing it. Until you start saying, I don't believe there was ever something wrong with my heart. The only thing that was wrong with my heart was I'm a sinner and my heart felt terrible about it. That's why I buried it. Or my heart made me compassionate, or my heart made me hungry for love, and other people called it weakness, or other people called it neediness, or other people saw something beautiful in it and it made them feel insecure, so they squashed it to make their world flat, to make their life make sense. And the way I took that as a kid is there's something wrong with me and I'm going to reject myself. And you'll never be right until you stop doing that. God doesn't want that. He wants you to take that to him. And he wants to show you what he made you for. And it wasn't a mistake. You can't know who you are and what you were created to do and do it and feel good about it if the whole time you're saying, I was a mistake. I need to recreate myself because I was a mistake. My heart is garbage and I have to rebuild it from scratch. I got to do it because God died on the cross. They didn't do it. The fact is there at bare minimum, there's been nothing wrong with your heart since you invited Jesus in. It's been what it needs to be. The problem is the relationship that you have with yourself, or that you have with him, or that you have with your calling. That's the problem. And when you start fixing one, it's going to get easier to fix the other. When you fix that one, then this one's going to get more in focus. And the more in focus it becomes, the clearer it is. Because the more you know God, the more you're going to understand the image of God that you were created in, the more you're going to understand your calling. The more you understand your calling and do it, the more sense it's going to make who you are. And the more sense it makes who you are, the more sense it's going to make who he is and what he's called you to do. Damage to these screws each other up and pulls you out of alignment. As you fix them, there's a synchronicity in it. There's a building up in it. And it starts just rising up. And it lifts all of you up in the process. It gets everything in balance. Godliness with contentment is great gain, right? It's an important thing. It's a necessary thing. How many things do you steal from your heart to give to your mind, to give to something else? Your heart would love to have control over your marriage, but no, I'm going to run my brain. Your heart would love to have a hand in your business, but shut up. I have a thing about being a hardworking man. You need to get out of here. A hardworking man doesn't even have a heart. So shut up and go away. We steal things from ourselves. We accuse ourselves constantly, not just the angry accusations I was talking about in the anger side, but just quiet judgments of, you're acting like you're an eyewitness. You act like you know what's in your heart, but you don't actually know what's in there. But you think you do, and you act like you do, and you speak it over yourself, and you tell anyone else that it's true. I'm just lazy, I'm just a loser, I was never good at that. And it's not even probably a thing you said originally, someone else said it. You just swallowed it. And now you won't shut up about it. The safest place is to say no one should be in the judge's seat. Except the guy who was in the judgment seat. I need to stop saying that I know anything about my heart. If I don't know, if God didn't tell me, as far as I'm concerned, it's not true. It's just a rumor. I'm not even going to waste any concern about it. It hits a different way when you get into God's providence, right? Because that's what coveting is. It's when you look at somebody else and says, well, that's a real covet. That's what God really loved. That's an image of God over there. That's like that guy in ministry or whatever. You look at somebody else and you covet them. You covet their very self. That's a real person, not this piece of garbage. It slips in. It's so quiet you don't even really realize it. You try to emulate somebody. He's my mentor. And deep down inside, it's a judgment against how God created you. You're not saying, I'm fearfully, wonderfully made. Will you teach me how to use it, mentor? You're saying, no, can I steal off your homework and become you? It's true over here. You take the Ten Commandments, apply it to your calling too. It's the same relationship. How often do we take our future, which is just as invisible as our own presence or God's presence, the destiny, that's invisible, man. You gotta walk by faith and not by sight when we're talking about our destiny. And how often do we take the empty chair and say, I'm gonna start putting some plans in there. I'll start taking some tangible investment strategies and putting it in that chair. Even though God didn't say anything about it, we want to shrink it down and make it manageable. We want to make it realistic. We start putting an image on it. We take some little picture that God gave us in our mind. You're going to write 12 books, and we're saying it to ourselves, but it's become a dead letter. It's easier to have a relationship with a dead letter than to trust the truth of the future. You know how God wants you to look at your future? It's already there. It's like if I was driving to Las Vegas. It's there. It's going to take me a while to get there, but it's there. It's not like I hope when I get there it's gone. I hope it's not gone. I hope I get there. Oh, there's no Las Vegas here. That's not how. God's like, I have created a situation that you fit into to fulfill your destiny. And I've created you to plug into that situation and fulfill your destiny. And I've created a journey to get you ready so that you'll be ready for that key to go in that lock and make it work. It's not a question of whether those things are there. It's a question of whether you're going to cooperate with the divine conspiracy that God has set up for you to fulfill your destiny. Basically, it's going to happen unless you fall on the ground and have a tantrum like a little kid. I'm not going to do what you told me to do. That's the only way that it's not going to work. It's if you completely blow this and say, well, God's a bully and I'm a loser, and that's never going to happen anyway. And so you don't take any responsibility, you're not aware of your abilities at all, and when you get there, you aren't respectable, not because all the pieces were there, but just because you refuse to put them together. The same things apply. We make false images of our callings. We speak of them in vain, like they aren't really there. How many times do you talk about your destiny and go, well, I hope, or I think, or maybe, or if I heard right, all these sort of things. Is that faith talking? That's you speaking in vain. And you're probably speaking in vain because you're holding on to a dead letter and you go, I believe in it, but man, every time I look at it, I feel so dead inside. Well, you know what your problem is you're not engaging in faith and actually touching that thing. You know, sometimes you don't need a new revelation from God. You just need the glory back. You just need to feel His Spirit on you. And He's not going to reveal anything new. He's just going to bring all the old things back to life. Sometimes you don't need a new revelation on who you are. You just need the old revelations that come to life. You need to come to life by touching it and being like, it's real. And sometimes you don't need to. There's no way that God's going to tell you enough about your future that you can have a new revelation about it every day. Fresh manna. That's not how it works. What you need is for God to breathe on it every day, to feel your future calling you, to feel destiny calling you. You need that. That's what allows you to do all the baby steps here, and so you don't get tired and lose heart and give up and stop applying yourself, and then you get to Las Vegas and you don't have the skills to take advantage of what's there. You're not prepared to step up. You don't even know who you are when you get there, so you don't even know the job you're supposed to do. You get to the destination, opportunities there, the door's wide open, but you don't know which door you're supposed to go through because you didn't pay attention. It doesn't have to happen that way, but most of the time it does. It happens because we don't respect God's process, it happens because we content ourselves with dead letters. Even though we know they're deadening us, we go, but it was alive once, so I'm going to keep looking at this dead thing that's making me dead, instead of saying, I'm going to stand on this, and I'm going to reach for God, and I'm going to exercise my faith until the Spirit shows up and this comes to life, because dead is dead, and life is life, and that's what really matters. How many times do we break some of these rules when it comes to our destiny? You see, you start doing it right with your destiny, it's the same thing. You refuse to fill your destiny with something else. You refuse to take your future and put anything else there. That's God's destiny seat. And leave it for God. That's where His plan goes, not where my plan goes. I'm going to refuse to make it a simple image and say, well, one day I'll be a pastor, and I can take that solid thing and put it however I want it to be. No, I keep it in that living place of the Spirit. The feeling, the power of it, the energy of it, the presence of that moment, the feeling of destiny. We actually see that when God gives you your calling, there are things that are deeper than any word, than any picture you can form. And when that glory fades, the letter is not sufficient. You got to go get the glory again. You got to get the fire again. You got to. To not speak flippantly of these things. Not speak of them in a faithless manner. To recognize the Sabbath rest. This is where we screw up so much with destiny. We act like we woke up on creation on day one. It's time to let there be light. And we're trying to do the whole thing. God's like, I made the whole universe before I even made you. Recognize that the work is done except for this tiny little piece that I want you to do. God tells us about our destiny. We're ready to rebuild the whole thing. It's like God said, hey, Robert, can you get in this car and drive over there and pick up some milk? And you walk out and you go, that car doesn't look good. And I start taking it apart. And you start rebuilding the engine, and you never go get the freaking milk. And God's like, I took care of the car. Like, I am so much better at this than you. Why didn't you do the job I told you to do and leave my job to me? But we do that all the time with our callings. And part of the reason is we don't know who we are, we don't know what our gifts are, and so we look at it and go, that doesn't seem like what I should be doing. I feel like I should be doing this. And so we twist and try to make the triangle back into a triangle, and all we do is pop other things out of alignment. Instead of going back and saying, I have a wrong idea of who I am, or this can't be who God is. It's so dead. I can't be seeing Him right. This has to be an idol because it doesn't even move. I look at myself, I'm a creation of God, but this is who I am. I'm this disgusting demonic lie. No way that that's who I am. That's a disgusting demonic lie. It's not me. That's my destiny. It doesn't. I guess I'll do it. Come on, that can't be right. But we'll accept death if it was alive once upon a time. No matter how twisted and rotten the manna is, we keep eating it because it came from God originally, but it's not full of His Spirit now. It won't feed you. It won't get you there. You have to come back and say, if it's not alive, it's dead. Resurrected. You are the resurrection of life. Bring it back. And cry out. Say, I'll accept no substitutes. I don't want an emotion to stir. I'm not saying, God, show me my future, and the moment an emotion shows up, I go, okay, I'm good. Or the moment you give me a new revelation, I go, no, God, I want to be in the presence of my destiny. I want to be standing in the factual nature of what you're going to do so that it sinks its roots deep in my heart, that nothing can prevent you from fulfilling your will. And when I walk out of my prayer closet, I have solidity on that. I'm standing steadfast on a rock there. It's important. That's why we talk about contentment. Contentment is such a great thing to have. Why? Because that's why. I know where I'm going. I know where I come from. I know whom I serve. Those are things that make a strong man and a powerful woman possible. Anything else is hollowness that will crumble at the first touch of opposition. Let me hit you with this. You start walking in your destiny. What happens to most people? They get getting close to it. Pride, boom, they explode. Look at how God is using me. What are they doing? They're not honoring their Father. That's how you set the rule. I'm not to honor myself. What did Jesus say? He says, if I honor myself, it means nothing. I honor my Father, and when I honor my Father, and when He honors me, it fills me up. If I honor myself, I'm still empty. If I honor myself in an attempt to get you to honor me, and you honor me, I'm still empty. It means nothing. Because you're not my creator, I'm not my creator. That's the only one who can fill it. So I'm going to make the smart move here, and I'm going to focus on honoring Him, not honoring myself. What about the other ones? You ever been angry about your calling? I'm not even really asking, because I know you have been. You're angry because it's too small. You're angry because it's too big. You're angry because it's too scary. You're angry because it's not great enough. You're angry because, man, why has it got to be like this? Why can't it be like this? It's constant. In your anger, don't sin against your future. Don't trade your future for a bowl of lentil soup today. People do it all the time. They get angry and they do something stupid. That's what Esau did. He was just pissed. And he said, sure, whatever, I'm not using it. He traded it away. It's not hard. It isn't. You know what happens when some dude cheats on his wife and blows up his marriage? He despised his future enough that the cheap blessing of an orgasm in this moment outweighed his future for just a moment. For just one angry moment to make a stupid decision, and he traded his future away. People do it all the time. Pastors getting caught on Tinder or at the strip club, or they're smoking a joint in the parking lot, and you go, you traded the call of God on your life for that? A masturbation problem, that was good enough for you to give up the call of God on your life, to ruin the whole thing for that. You have to despise your future. You have to be angry about it to make a decision that dumb. You're not actually that dumb. You have to be angry enough to not want to think about it, to not reflect on it. It's the stupidity that only comes out of vengeance. I don't care if I die as long as I punch back. Don't violate the covenant of intimacy that you have with your future. How does that work? It's the same thing with your heart. God's going to say, if you want your destiny, you're going to have to follow certain rules about it that maybe other people don't have to follow. Samson couldn't cut his hair if he wanted to fulfill his destiny of being a strong warrior who delivered Israel from the Philistines, right? There are things like that all over the place. St. Patrick, when he went to Ireland, he felt God say, you cannot leave. You cannot go home. If you go home, the work will collapse here. He didn't understand why, but he knew it, and he never left. His parents were back there. Everyone he knew was back in England. His country fell into paganism while he was in Ireland. He couldn't go back. People excommunicated him, disfellowshipped him. They spoke lies about him, and he could go back and defend himself, and he never went. And they said, see, he won't come back and defend himself. He must be off. But God said, you need to do it this way. They're weird things. There have been times when God came up, when there opportunities came up in my life to completely change something. Like, oh, here's a church. I can take this guy's offering me a church. I can get this church. I can have a nice paycheck. I will simplify a lot of things in my life. And God said, if you do that, you'll lose it. You'll lose what I'm offering you. You'll have that instead. There's covenants that we have with our future, with God's plan for our life. You think if Paul went and got married, it would have worked out right? So screw it, God, I want to get married, man. Just itching. I need to get married. God's like, I got grace sufficient for the celibacy I've called you to. If you'll learn it, it'll work out. If you disobey me on this, this isn't going to work the way you want it to. There's costs to breaking that kind of a thing. It's not an oopsie. Paul got married. He wouldn't have been able to go, oops, forgive me. God would have forgave him, but he would say, look, Paul, you're not going to fulfill the destiny I have for you. We might be able to take some broken pieces and make another something over here. I might be able to return some of the years the locust just gobbled up. My mercy is great. But let's face it, this woman has a destiny, and now her destiny is entwined with yours. Changes are going to have to be made. Don't steal from your future. We talked about that. Don't make false accusations. Don't be a false witness. Don't act like you know anything about your future other than what God said. Not in the positive, not in the negative, not in your fears, not in your hopes. Let God be judge. Stay out of it. And then especially with the coveting thing, that pops up real big with that issue. You look at your destiny, you look at your future, you start comparing it to other, what could be, what I wanted before I got saved versus this, versus what that guy has. Recognize what it is. It's saying, I think I could design a better future for me than God. It's not true. And it's a sin against you. It's a sin against your future and all you're meant to be. It's a sin against God who made the plan, and it's awesome. You have the faith to go check it out. These are the things I wanted to point out to us today. These are tools, I guess. But the main thing I wanted to say, the main thing I wanted to point us at is these focal points. Nothing else works if you don't know who your God is, you don't know who you are, and you don't know where you're going. And the biggest trick that people fall into is either they answer these questions for themselves. You might have some of that going on. Or, I think this is a big one for us, you get the answer from God. That's the right move. But when it turns into a dead letter, you don't do anything about it. It'll happen. You get some distance. If you're not living on the mountaintop, which is what we're chasing after, but none of us are there yet. If you're not living on the mountaintop, guess what happens when you bring the tablets down? The glory fades. You have to recognize having the dead tablets is different than having the tablets with the glory. There's a difference between knowing God and having knowledge of God and just having knowledge of God. There's a difference between knowing yourself and having knowledge of yourself. They come together, but then your knowing of yourself fades. And you just have the knowledge. Knowing your destiny as well as having knowledge of it, and then just knowing something about it. But you don't have that intimate contact. We're not talking about something cerebral here. We're talking about your spirit touching something. Is your spirit touching God? Do you know Him? Is your spirit touching your own heart? Are you in contact with your true self? Are you touching your future? Is God allowing you to touch the destiny that's calling you forward? Because if you're not in contact with it, all the knowledge in the world is just brain fat. It's nothing. It's not going to get you anything that you need. It's not going to solidify inside of you. It's not that I have the knowledge of what I'm supposed to be doing. I have the knowledge. No, I know what I'm supposed to be doing. I know who I am, and I know that I'm doing it because I know God in the midst of it. Contentment is a huge thing. Like the scripture says, godliness, reverence with contentment is great gain. And almost an understatement. It's scripture, I don't want to say it's an understatement, but it's like our ability to digest that truth and really understand how heavy and weighty that is. I don't think we're even close to getting it. If you could have that, and believe me, if you can get the contentment, the reverence isn't going to be hard. Staying in the presence of God isn't hard once you're content. The difficulty with it is the discontentment, the brokenness, the shame, the wondering, the question marks. That's what makes it hard to chase after God. That would, sometimes it's hard. We can't get in the presence of God because we're the wrong person. Or a false self trying to spend time with God. That's not going to work either. But if you will center yourself in these things, if you'll get the focal points right with God, and you'll insist on them being a knowing, not just a knowledge, something you're experiencing regularly, that you spend time in God's presence. So so that you know Him instead of just know about Him. That you spend time with God in your own heart, looking at who you really are. And that's not a knowledge thing as much as it is a presence thing. To know your own presence, to be comfortable in your own skin, as they say. And the same thing with your future. To spend time with God, walking in the prophetic reality of what He's spoken, so that it etches into your bones, so that you know the feeling of your future. It might not add anything to your knowledge, but you know exactly what it tastes like to be there. You can smell it coming on the wind as you look out to the future. Like, yeah, I don't know how far it is, but it's like fresh bread being baked. I know it's over there somewhere. Maybe a breeze is carrying it from a bakery that's further away than I think, but it's real. That contentment strengthens us. Whether you're a man, whether you're a woman, these are things that we should be looking at and saying, what do we expect to build if we don't have that? What do we expect to build if we don't really know who God is? We don't really know who we are. We don't really know what our calling is. Triangle without these corners, these lines weaving all over the place, it's just spaghetti soup. That's all it is. Lord, I thank you for this message. Lord, I thank you for the knowledge, for the wisdom you're willing to share with us. God, I thank you for your Holy Spirit, who is always here, reaching out, tapping our hearts, reaching to take our hands, inviting us to come into the experience of the things that you testify to. God, I pray for faith and courage and hope and even hunger, God, for these things that we've talked about today. I pray that you would lift up one part of this message in every person's mind and every person's spirit as a first step, as something to step out with you, God, and begin to experience the power of this thing. And it can spread from there. I know it's a lot of ground. We're not going to cover it all in 1 week or 1 month or however long. But there's a step that we can begin taking even today, even this week, to begin to know you better, to begin to know who we really are in the core of ourselves, to know what you